Chapter 8:12. Now that Antonidas, the transfer station of magic power, was suppressed, Duque could use more magic power. He stood with his hands behind his back. As he walked, the volcano under his feet slowly rose, forming a path of lava that led to Antonidas. However, under Duque's feet, every drop of fire element automatically separated. When Duque's feet landed, the lava automatically cooled down to a normal temperature, allowing Duque's feet to step on it. Around Duque, the smoke of the magic war grew more and more intense. Antonidas kept coming up with more types of magic, some of which only existed in legends. Not to mention a young mage like Jaina, even Crassus, who had lived for thousands of years, looked as if he had seen a ghost. Even though he had the encyclopedia of red dragon magic, he had only heard of many spells before. Even more terrifyingly, even though it was a spell that nobody had seen before, Duque merely glanced at it and paused for half a second, before a corresponding magic hand appeared in the void with a brand new magic array and cancelled Antonidas' spell. Every senior rank mage who witnessed that scene was at a loss. They mumbled to themselves, "That's impossible, chaos and order had been opposing each other since ancient times. Those who created chaos would be harmed by chaos. That should have been an unbreakable truth." But what did they see now? Anyone with enough magic knowledge could tell that Duque had created a temporary magic circuit outside his body and used it to push a brand new magic array to resist and counteract Antonidas' spell. When the magic array cancelled out the opponent's spell, all the magic backlashes would be borne by the temporary magic circuit. Be it chaos, shattering, or collapsing, all the damage stopped outside of Duque's body. It couldn't cause any damage to Duque himself. Besides, even the magic power to create the temporary magic circuit and the new magic array was provided by the branch of magic power in the well of the sun. Duque had completely gained something without risking anything. No. If there was anything Duque had to pay for, it would be his astonishing knowledge and inhuman reaction speed. Since ancient times, the birth of every magic was accompanied by countless painful experiments. The more powerful a spell was, the higher the price it had to pay. Even Breaking Dawn mages would have to kneel if they tried to analyze an ancient spell when their legacies had been severed. Not to mention researching a disruptive spell to counter this rare spell. At this moment, it was a situation that made Antonidas and all the witnesses break down. Antonidas' spells in all magic domains were countered. At some point, the battles between the radiant moons had come to a halt. Both sides retreated with a clear distinction. They had a tacit understanding of each other after fighting for so long. Given the current situation, it was impossible to bypass the other party and interfere with the duel between Breaking Dawn wizards. On the other hand, once a victor was decided, the enemy's forces at or below the radiant moon level would definitely crumble. Rather than spending a great deal of effort and still not being able to affect the outcome of the battle, why not save it for later? Crassus took a deep breath as if he was about to unleash a dragon's breath. The only explanation now is that Duque has read all the magic books in Karazhan and prepared a counterspell for every spell recorded in them, he said in a rumbling voice, as if he was about to unleash a dragon's breath. That's impossible. How old is he? Jaina Goldsword cried out in shock. She could not be blamed for crying out. High elves had extremely long lifespans. She had been unhappy with the decadent atmosphere of the Silvermoon Parliament. After reaching the Radiant Moon realm and discovering that they could not advance to the Breaking Dawn realm, they decisively led a befuddled life and did not seek to improve. That was why she had left Kuel Salis and wandered the continent. There had been a period of time when she had been a member of the Dalajan Kirin Tor Parliament. It was to borrow the Dalajan's books legally. However, it had taken her 3,000 years to read all 100,000 magic books. With her achievements, it was enough for her to be proud to call herself a polymath. It was not impossible to create a counterspell for the spells in the books. But it was definitely not so fast, so accurate, and so perfect. The problem was that now, what Duque had done had subverted all her common sense. Beside her, Jaina calmed her rapid breathing from the fierce battle and recalled bits and pieces of Duque. She suddenly smiled bitterly. Duque is a superman who can use 100 magic hands to flip through a report and 100 magic eyes to read a report at the same time. Gina's words almost choked the surrounding archmages to death. That's right, this was not something that could be done in a day and a half. As early as the second battle at the Dark Portal, there was an exaggerated feat of Duque single-handedly taking care of the logistics of the entire alliance. Unexpectedly, after more than 10 years, this godly skill of Duque seemed to have become even more amazing. Just thinking about it made the bystanders feel like they were going to collapse. How big was the Karazhan library? According to Gina's memories, even if they didn't count the well-hidden secret and forbidden books, there were more than 1,000,000 books outside. If it were an ordinary human mage, even if they died reading here, it would be impressive if they could read through 10,000 books in their lifetime. Everyone only knew that Duque was different from them. But they couldn't dissect Duque. For Duque, as long as he scanned every page of any book, it would automatically form an identical magic book in the system library. It wasn't as simple as just recording. When Duque's brain was idle, the system elf would also borrow Duque's brainpower to analyze all the spells in the magic books, deducing, simplifying, condensing, and marking out the flaws and developing counterspells on his own. In the memories of the years when Gina was studying under Duque, Duque was often like an ignorant and incompetent book-flipping criminal. Walking to a bookshelf, regardless of what book it was, with a snap of his fingers, from bottom to top, he used the hand of magic to flip through the books in order, flipped them once, and then put them back. The only difference was that at that time, there were at most 10 hands of magic and eyes of magic working. At that time, Duque didn't look like he was reading at all, but flipping through the books to see if there would be anything like golden leaves in them. Jaina would never have thought that Duque, with the help of the system elf, was studying magic books at a speed 100 times faster than a normal person 24 hours a day. Studying while eating. Studying while drinking water. Summarizing while sleeping. Even when they were having sex, the system elf also faithfully helped Duque categorize and summarize magic knowledge. That was why there was this incomparably terrifying Duque now. As long as there was enough magic power. Duque was the god of magic. Magic exploded between Duque and Antonidas like brilliant fireworks, then dissipated with the wind. Before he knew it, Duque had walked to 10 meters in front of the Great Lich. Duque's lips curled into a smile. Spellbreaker? Who said I was a spellbreaker? I'm just a spellbreaker in the world. Chapter 8:13. Unbreakable? Duque's voice spread far and wide. If Duque hadn't destroyed all the spells that were known as the Encyclopedia of Magic in front of 200,000 people. If Duque hadn't been the most powerful wizard in the Alliance who'd become a breaking dawn long ago. If Duque's opponent hadn't been the Great Lich Antonidas, who was also a breaking dawn. If Duque didn't turn the tide time and time again under the crisis, Duque's seemingly boastful words were enough to make all the pharaohs in the world curse Duque and scold Duque. But now, in the face of absolute battle achievements, no one cared if you were a fake breaking dawn. Everyone could see Duque beating up the Sun King, an Astrian Sunstrider, and now Antonidas, who was also a breaking dawn, being ruthlessly suppressed. The reason why a legendary hero could become a legend was not only because of his shocking achievements, but also because of rumors and exaggerations. One had to be strong to forge iron, but without advertising, who would know if one was strong enough? Duque was closing in on Antonidas step by step. This was an imminent threat to the Great Lich, but from another perspective, it was also an opportunity. Evidently, as Antonidas continued to throw out new spells, Duque had less time to break them, and the situation became more dangerous. Both of them had immense magic power. One was the power of darkness, while the other was the power of light, the power of the sun. For a moment, the elemental turbulence around the two combatants grew more and more violent due to the intense explosions. It was like a raging storm. Duque, you clearly had such strength, so why didn't you use it at the start? Why did you have to wait until I fell before using it? Why did you make me so ugly? From Antonidas' tone, it seemed like he was blaming his fall on Duque. Looking at the Great Lich, Duque couldn't help but recall the extremely conservative policies Antonidas had adopted in the past decade. Sigh. It's exactly because you've become so stubborn and arrogant that this has happened. Duque shrugged. You couldn't defeat a dreadlord in a one-on-one fight, and you were even killed by a trap set up by the enemy. So you're blaming me? You. Antonidas uttered the word, you, 3 times in a row. His cloudy eyeball looked like it was going to fall out of his rotten skull at any time. Duque's facial muscles twitched as he cursed in his heart, that's why I hate liches. They affect the city too much. Whether Antonidas liked it or not, he was now immortal. Unlike Cervantes, who had become the undead queen in history, it was understandable that he, who had taken the path of a lich, had given up on himself because of his disfigurement. Understanding was not the same as understanding. Their different standpoints meant that the two of them would not let each other go. No one could turn back now. Just as Duque expected, Antonidas was like a giant beast that devoured the heavens and earth. After swallowing a huge amount of dark force, he finally released his ultimate move. Suddenly, a majestic and cold aura spread across the entire world, as if winter had suddenly descended. The endless chill spread in all directions with the Great Lich as the center. In the blink of an eye, there was no longer a boundary between heaven and earth. The gray sky disappeared. The Isle of Quel'Danas, where even the sand was emitting a faint sunlight, also disappeared. The entire world was only left with a gloomy white. It was the plains of death covered in ice and snow. It had to be said that Antonidas, who had started his career playing frost magic, seemed to be fated with the Lich King. However, Duque still had an undisguised look of surprise on his face. According to the system notification, Antonidas had injected more than 80% of his soul into this gray and white world. It was not unusual for any demigod to use a huge amount of magic as energy and his own soul to build an imaginary domain world. In the realm of demigods, some demigods like to strengthen their bodies to the extreme, while others like to use their domain world to suppress their enemies. For example, the Queen of Dreams, Isra, walked the path of becoming one with her domain world. As long as she was in the dream world, she was the strongest. She was the Emerald Dream, and the Emerald Dream was her. Once her main body or the Emerald Dream was corrupted, she would be finished. It was obvious that Antonidas had chosen the same path as Isra. What a pity, Duque felt that it was a pity. It was a pity that Antonidas had used it at the wrong time. If Antonidas had been a peak-breaking dawn and was about to break through, he might have been able to break through the breaking dawn bottleneck and become a demigod after borrowing the Lich King's dark force. But now, a certain someone had shamelessly taken away many of his magic circuits, and his newly created magic circuits had yet to be completely stabilized. In addition, his strength was far from the semi-god level. If he brazenly unleashed a domain that he was unfamiliar with, it would undoubtedly be destroying his own future. This might be the only chance in his life for him to step into the realm of domain world. From then on, because of the damage to his soul, this once unparalleled human great wizard, no matter what form he existed in the world, had no room for growth. It was not that Antonidas did not hesitate, he was not so decisive, and he was not fanatically loyal to the Lich King. He was purely treated as an abandoned pawn by Zul. Yes. In a sense, Zul did not lack Lich fighters. Now he had Anastrian, the resurrected Kel-Thuzad, and Antonidas under him. In terms of loyalty, Antonidas could not compare to Kel-Thuzad, who was like-minded with the Lich King. In terms of strength, Anastrian was actually a head above Olden. If the price of Antonidas not being able to advance again in the future was to eliminate a great enemy like Duque, then it was really worth it. Duque could not help but sigh. As expected, once one's strength weakened, it would not end well. Antonidas pulled him into the icy plains of death. In his domain, other than what Duque had, all external forces were isolated. Duque's biggest problem was undoubtedly that he could no longer borrow elemental power from the outside world. Of course, this included the most important magic power of the Sunwell branch. Although Antonidas might not be able to maintain the domain for a long time, it was still quite fatal to Duque. After all, after losing the help of external forces, Duque immediately returned to his original form, becoming the pharaoh whose magic power was only at the peak of the radiant moon realm. It had to be said that Antonidas was a veteran powerhouse who had experienced hundreds of battles. Although the older he got, the more extreme he became, and he once lost his soul and had his soul captured, his sensitivity and judgment towards magic battles were still as good as before. He immediately grasped Duque's weakest link. Chapter 8:14. In the endless snowfield of death, Duque's figure was so lonely and helpless. The aura of the Alliance commander and the glory of the legendary hero seemed to have faded at this moment. Duque could only rely on himself. Duque. Duke Marcus. Are you still going to struggle in vain? What's the point of your resistance in the face of the mighty power of the Lich King? Antonida's voice echoed in the entire white world. His loud voice made Duque's eardrums hurt. F***ck, aren't you the underling of someone else's underling? Even you, Zul, have to kneel in front of me. What are you pretending to be? Duque couldn't help but complain. Suddenly, the clouds in the sky were so thick that they were almost solid. Obviously, Antonidas, who had turned himself into the world, had a dark expression on his face. Although he didn't like looking up, Duque still looked up at the sky. He looked at the world as if he was looking at Antonidas. Suddenly, Duque felt a little pity for this former elder of the Alliance. Duque was not a saint. It was impossible for him to save everyone in front of the aggressive dark forces, especially when fate had changed dramatically. Compared to the current fallen Antonidas, the original ending of being killed by Arthas and directly becoming a ghost wandering in the ruins of the Dalajan seemed a little more glorious. Alas! Duque sighed. If Antonidas fought him in a place far away from the Well of the Sun, or outside of the domain, he would naturally be beaten like a dog. After losing his life, Duque might not even be able to escape with his soul. Why did Antonidas have to drag him into an immature field? If this was a domain that had been truly tempered and condensed after continuous improvement, it could only belong to Antonidas. Perhaps this time, it would be Duque who would kneel. This domain, on the surface, maximized his ice magic and completely rejected all power except ice and death. In fact, this world was not Antonidas' home field in the real sense. This was a domain that the Lich King, Zul, had used Antonidas as a medium to weave the laws of the Lich King. Antonidas. Duque could not help but sigh, his eyes filled with pity. What? The veteran Breaking Dawn Great Wizard was startled, his face full of vigilance. Then he saw Duque's gaze change. It became cold and mechanical. He didn't know what it was. If he knew, he would have stopped Duque immediately. At this moment, there were many green dots of light pouring down from top to bottom in Duque's retina. This was naturally the data provided by the system elf, who had completely fused with Duque's soul. After the system's transformation, the entire domain world was no longer what it looked like with the naked eye. It was a digitized world made up of countless zeros and ones. In this world that had been completely transformed into binary, every bit of Antonidas's magic flow could not be hidden from Duque's eyes that had been strengthened by the system. Duque spoke, his voice low and full of regret. We could have been friends despite the difference in age, but every time, you treat my help as a deal. So, you don't owe me anything, and I don't owe you anything. Let me end this. As he spoke, Duque slowly raised his arm and stretched out his palm towards the void. His clenched palm was clearly grabbing the air in front of him, but in an inconspicuous void in the distance, there was something that had the same shape as Duque's hand. Antonidas condensed his face in midair, and one could clearly see that the old Lich's eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. There was indescribable horror in his voice. This is impossible. How did you know? The corners of Duque's mouth curled up slightly. Actually, you're the inexperienced one. You shouldn't have used your magic circuit model to create this domain. Because you were afraid that you couldn't withstand the dark power that Zul had gathered for you, the first thing you thought of was to use the circuit you were most familiar with as a foundation. But you couldn't have. Duque raised his left hand and shook it proudly. Have you forgotten? 14 years ago, it was you who personally gave me the prototype of the arcane throne, and the crown of ice, magic circuit. Since I used the same circuit prototype as you, how could I not have studied where it was easiest to destroy? Bastard. Antonidas was exasperated. He roared and immediately set off a wild wave. He was about to drown Duque with absolute dark power. But time suddenly seemed to freeze in the entire space. Because the old lich saw Duque take out a round, egg-sized scale that emitted a red light. This was a treasure that Duke had spent 81 times to exchange for from the hands of a certain giant dragon imperial sister with great difficulty. Although it was accidentally knocked off by a certain dragon thousands of years ago, and new scales had already grown, how could something that belonged to a dragon aspect be worthless? Scale of life, a dragon scale that contained the high heat and strong vitality of a dragon's breath. Under normal circumstances, this was just a good epic item. But for the Calamity Army, which specialized in coldness and death, this was a super killing weapon that was no less than a divine artifact. In such an occasion, the lethality was definitely on the level of a nuclear bomb. And now, he was going to give it to Antonidas as a gift. No, this is impossible. Antonidas could hardly believe what he saw. When Duque rushed back, even Lordaeron had not fallen. Could it be that he had already foreseen the fall of Arthas, and had asked Alexstrasza to prepare a treasure to deal with the Calamity Army? How could there be such a coincidence in this world? Or could it be that all the mages of the Mediv had the ability to prophesy? Antonidas would never have thought that Duque was a super troublemaker from another world. Antonidas was on the verge of a mental breakdown. His domain was clearly his home field. In this world created by his power, he should have the absolute advantage. Why did it seem like he had sent his phylactery to Duque's hammer and let Duque smash it? But this was not entirely his world, and he could not control it at all. As the dark power continuously flowed into his soul, he could not even stop it. No, the great lich let out a scream. Duque sighed and shook his head. He flicked his finger and the dragon scale to a place where 36 magic circuits converged. It's over, Antonidas. Chapter 8:15. Arg! Antonidas let out an earth-shattering scream. The entire world was like a living person getting goosebumps. Immediately, countless bumps that made people shudder appeared, as though something was about to explode and erupt. Arg! Antonidas' original form screamed as he appeared in this world. Although he had hidden himself a long time ago, any place that dealt with the most power of darkness would definitely have the core of his soul. After knowing this, under the scanning of the system elf, the pitiful great lich had nowhere to hide. Without the sage-like appearance of an old wizard with fluttering white hair and beard, and without the aura of a supreme being who commanded thousands of men and horses, Antonidas, who had lost all external disguises, looked no different from a ghoul hugging its head and curling up into a ball. Duque's scale of life did not just destroy the main vein of this domain world, but also the order of this world. The overly concentrated power of darkness rampaged in his soul, as though it would explode at any moment. At the very end, he stood up straight, his body trembling as though there were whips lashing at him every moment. If Duque's guess was right, this was a punishment from the soul. Antonidas' voice trembled, but there was a sense of tranquility. Duque. I've made many mistakes in my life. But my greatest honor is to have once created a prosperous Dalajan. On account of the time we fought side by side, please promise me to revive the Dalajan. Finally, please give me a quick death. I don't want to return to the throne of Zul. Duque was a little surprised. Not every soul was named Uther or Bolvar, and could resist the terrifying pressure of the Lich King. Although he did not think that Antonidas had such willpower and boldness, which could be seen from the old wizard's fall, he really did not think that the old wizard would be able to break free from the Lich King's soul shackles at the last moment of his collapse. This made Duque inexplicably feel more respect for the veteran Breaking Dawn wizard who had ruled the Dalajan for nearly 50 years. Good. I promise you, I will revive the Dalajan. Just as I did with Stormwind. An expression of relief appeared on Antonidas's withered face, which was unique to a lich. In Duque's green world that had been digitally altered by a sea of zeros and ones, he could clearly see that Antonidas was collecting all the pieces of his soul into this body. In his field of vision, Antonidas's face quickly changed back to the appearance of a living person, that wise elder with white hair and a white beard. At this time, Nenazul's sharp and exasperated voice came from the void. "No. Antonidas. Your soul belongs to me. You have no right to deal with your own soul." Antonidas was anxious. "Duque. Hurry up and move. Even if I only have 10% of my soul left, Nenazul can still forcefully resurrect me and force me to serve him." Duque's heart suddenly skipped a beat. Without hesitation, a golden shadow suddenly rushed out from Duque's body. It was an illusion that was identical to Duque's real body. The biggest difference between it and Duque's real body was that it emitted an incomparably holy aura. Between the index and middle fingers of its right hand was a coin. In the next moment, the coin turned into a standard cross sword that knights loved to use. The cross sword emitted a golden light and pierced into Antonidas's forehead like lightning. "This sword?" Antonidas's expression suddenly changed, and a smile of relief appeared on his face. A voice floated into Duque's soul. "Thank you, Duque. In the Dalajan, 300 meters below my wizard tower, there is my last treasure. The password is to connect my 2 magic circuits with my real name." Duque's whole body trembled. He really did not think that after killing Antonidas, there would be such extra equipment. Duque saw that a large number of zeros and ones around him were speeding up the separation. Antonidas's elemental power was disintegrating. In just a few seconds, the snow-white world supported by the dark power quickly faded, and the periphery gradually returned to the seaside scenery on the Isle of Quel'Danas. "It's Duque." Sylvanas was the first to see the figure inside clearly. Her heart failed to live up to her expectations and started beating wildly. Immediately, there was a burst of screams from the crowd. They did not think that the battle between the two would be so terrifying. The huge dark power turned into a huge cocoon with a diameter of a kilometer, tightly wrapping the two people. No outsider would be able to get involved. He had thought that this would be an evenly matched battle that would drag on for a long time. Who would have thought that in less than 3 minutes, the winner would be decided? Duque thrust his sword forward, and the illusory blade of the golden cross sword was like a burning golden flame, directly igniting the old lich's body. The long sword that was like a holy sword pierced through the great lich's head and rapidly melted his soul. This scene, in the eyes of the 200,000 soldiers, was like an apostle of God using supreme divine power to punish the evil fallen. Everyone's expression was gone, leaving only a look of disbelief. "Saint Duque, oh my God! It really is Saint Duque." The people unconsciously murmured, reciting the nickname of Duque when he revived Stormwind and saved the people with supreme wisdom and internal power. "That's right. Saint Duque." The legendary name that was transmitted by every bard shone again at this moment. Not only were the humans and a few dwarves shouting, but Theron even found that many elves were also shouting Duque's holy name. On the other side, after Duque's golden illusion stabbed the sword, Antonidas's withered body trembled violently. When Duque's illusion pulled out the golden sword of holy light, the illusion disappeared. Duque put his hands behind his back, stepped on the sand, and walked to the side of the former chairman of the Kirin Tor. This once famous mage leader could no longer maintain the illusory appearance of an old mage, and had returned to the form of a lich. Duque looked at Antonidas's turbid eyes. At this moment, he could not even feel the joy of victory in his heart. He only asked calmly, "Is this okay?" The great lich's throat gurgled, but in the end, it seemed that because his vocal cords had decayed for too long, he still could not make a sound. At this moment when his soul was beginning to collapse, further emotional expression seemed to be an extravagant hope. Looking at him, Duque could not help but show a trace of sadness in his eyes. In his impression, there did not seem to be a good ending for fallen people. Duque took one last look at the sad old mage and turned to leave. But this former supreme ruler of the Dalajan was like the last radiance of the setting sun. His body trembled violently, and then there was a whisper in the wind. It was a sound that Antonidas had recalled thousands of times, and who knew how many times he tried to control his throat to squeeze out a sound. Thank you, that was a human, not an undead, expressing his gratitude at the end of his life. Duque stopped and replied softly, You're welcome. Chapter 8:16. Antonidas's final expression was fixed on a peaceful smile. As a lich, even a smile was terrifying, but he was indeed smiling from the bottom of his heart. His dry throat made unintelligible noises. He reached out his withered hand as if trying to grab something. Was it his lost youth? Or was it the glory of being a human? This, perhaps, would forever be a mystery. His soul disintegrated, and the last power that drove the decaying body also disappeared. The sea breeze blew, and the once famous mage leader's body was like a sand castle blown away by the wind, turning into sand and dissipating with the wind. Duque looked at the coin floating in his hand, a little stunned. This was a gift of moral integrity that Archbishop Alonso's Fail had left him. A long time ago in the Dalajan, a Lordaeran missionary threw a copper coin into the fountain and made a wish. I hope that one day, I can spread the way of holy light to the commoners, and teach them the meaning of the three great virtues. After Alonso's passed away, the sole coin that was passed on to Duque was the condensed divine will in Duque's hand. After receiving Duque's permission, it merged with Duque's soul. With the truth, beauty, and all the righteous will around Duque as nourishment, this soul coin had become shining, full of holy aura. Duque did not notice the gazes of the pastors in the army of 200,000 soldiers. Not to mention Sally Whitemane, a young girl who had just touched the way of holy light. Even a bishop like Benedicta had a look of yearning. Duque finally seemed to notice the burning gazes of the crowd. He laughed at himself. If I can't continue on the path of the pharaoh in the future, can I still go to the church and give some pointers to the female pastors? Just when everything seemed to have come to an end, the Lich King Zul's will condensed into a huge, icy blue skull in the air. This was a terrifying virtual image with a diameter of over 100 meters. It exuded an evil black spirit light and a terrifying aura that caused the temperature to plummet. Every living being that witnessed this could not help but feel as if a huge rock was pressing down on their hearts. They felt like they could not breathe. Oh my God! He had already killed a Breaking Dawn Great Lich. Why were there so many creepy existences in the Calamity Army? Zul roared with all his might, Duke Marcus, and you lowly humans and elves, do you think this is victory? Do you think I will let you go just like that? No. This was just the beginning. Death will eventually cover every inch of the world of Azeroth. Duque stopped and did not look back. Zul, that's enough. The last time you came to Karazhan, you were blown up by Kill Jaden and only had a soul left. Haven't you suffered enough? How dare you believe the words of Kill Jaden the Deceiver? If the commander of the Burning Legion really succeeds in descending to Azeroth, you, who have no value, will not even be as good as a ghoul. Duque's words were more of a nail in Zul's heart than a spoiler. From the beginning to the end, Zul was not willing to work for Kill Jaden. In the original history, Zul took the opportunity to escape again. Duque was just pretending to make a deduction based on Kill Jaden's character. Suddenly, Zul almost choked to death. You, if there were Kill Jaden's henchmen nearby, Zul might have pretended to shout a few words of "Long live the Burning Legion" to show his loyalty. However, although Zul was afraid of death, his self-esteem was still very strong. After all, he had been a great chieftain and had now named himself the noble filthy goblin king. In front of so many people, Zul would never admit that he was Kill Jaden's dog. After choking for 3 seconds, Zul finally roared, Duque. You think you're in control of the situation, but you're wrong. I'm telling you, you're definitely a loser this time. You'll never know what my perfect plan is. Even if you have the ability to stop Arthas now, my plan to destroy Azeroth will still not be affected in the slightest. Whether it's humans, dwarves, elves, or any other race, your only fate is to become my slaves after death. The land you cherish will become a rotten land worse than Draenor. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Duque bared his teeth. Think? Do I still need to think about it? I already know what you're going to do. Zul, are you done with your nonsense? If you're done, then get lost. I used to think that you were trash who only knew how to fart, but now you've actually fallen to become a dog who only knows how to fart. Aren't you ashamed? That's right. The Burning Legion's repeated attacks on Azeroth were almost unstoppable. Even if they could withstand it this time, they could not avoid the next time. Since that was the case, Duque, who was still a transmigrator, was thinking about how to make the Alliance grow faster and how to strengthen himself. Other than saving the High Elves, the next most important thing was of course for the Night Elves to join the Alliance. The Elves were all super conservative, not to mention the Night Elves who were rampant with the Druid doctrine. If the demons did not come to their door, would the Night Elves run out to ask for help? Archimonde's arrival was certainly a tragedy. But protecting the World Tree did not benefit Duze and the Alliance at all. Therefore, Duque had already made up his mind to decisively let the Alliance do nothing before Archimonde killed his way to the World Tree. Of course, there was a large group of the future Alliance's middle power, led by Sylvanas, watching. As the leader of the Alliance, Duque still had to put on an act no matter what. At this moment, Duque's moral integrity was in his body. At this second, Duque's body glowed with a golden light. At this moment, Duque was openly lying. The handsome Duque raised his head and looked at the skeleton in midair. He raised his right hand, and the holy gold coin once again turned into a holy sword. Humph. A 40-meter long sword. Oh, it's a super holy sword. I'm asking you if you're afraid. Duque's words were righteous and overflowing with a noble spirit. Haha. You underestimate the intelligent races of Azeroth. Do you think you can overthrow the entire Azeroth with your lousy plot? Nah, Zul, do you want to destroy this world? Have you asked us? With that, Duque turned around and looked at those pairs of burning eyes. Then, he shouted at the Alliance soldiers, human soldiers, this despicable demon in front of us says he wants to kill us all and turn us into this bastard's slaves. Do you agree? Chapter 8:17. Tens of thousands of Scarlet Cross elites raised their weapons high and shouted in the loudest voice since the start of the war, no, answer, yes. Duque continued to shout, dwarves and gnome brothers, this guy says he wants to destroy all civilizations. What do you think? Damn it. The violent dwarves raised their warhammers high. Duque finally waved at the elves. This bastard not only destroyed your homes, but he also wants to burn down every last inch of green space and a small tree. What do you think? Sylvanas stood out proudly. For the blood of Quell Dorii. We must take revenge. Who among the High Elves did not know the strength and terror of the enemy? Those who could gather here were naturally the most courageous and unyielding in the entire Elven race. They were the backbone of the future revival of the High Elves and the pillars of the reconstruction of the Elven kingdom. The earth-shattering roars of the humans and the sonorous and powerful shouts of the dwarves deeply stimulated the hearts of these tens of thousands of elves. They thought of their dead relatives and friends, and of their destroyed homes. An unparalleled rage suddenly gushed out from the depths of their hearts and rushed straight to their heads. They abandoned the nobility and restraint that they once boasted about, tore off the mask of gentleness and elegance in front of the world, especially in front of humans, and shouted in unison. Revenge. 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 The morale of the troops could be used. Almost without thinking, Sylvanas, who struck while the iron was hot, suddenly raised his war bow and shouted, Our kingdom is destroyed. Our city is destroyed. Our compatriots and loved ones are killed. In order for future generations to never forget this day, I announce that Quell Dorii will be renamed to Sin Dorii. Duque could not hide the surprise on his face. Quell, in the Elven language of Salis meant nobility, and Sin meant blood. The High Elves had changed their name from Quell Dorii to Sin Dorii, which was originally done by Kale, that's in history. It had to be said that history was shockingly similar. In a certain scene, under certain circumstances, they would make the same choice. At this moment, in the tens of thousands of elven troops, every elf was full of anger. In their rage, they desperately needed to vent. They did not even notice that Servanas, who was technically just a National Salvation Committee and officially a Ranger General, did not have the authority to make such a major decision. One or two of them, tens of thousands of people, were completely enraged by Zol's clamor. Naturally, they agreed to Servanas' call. This kind of astonishing momentum. Could it be that after Servanas doesn't need to become an undying, God will still send her the throne of queen? What about the Forsaken? I, Duque, am from the Alliance. Why should I care about the tribe? Alright, since Sylvanas doesn't need to change races and still has the chance to become Queen Sylvanas, I definitely don't mind giving you a push. Duque pursed his lips at Servanas and glanced at the Lich King's skull from the corner of his eye. Sylvanas immediately understood. Demon. Get lost. A loud shout rang out. He drew the bow and knocked the arrow in one smooth motion. This was an action that Sylvanas had practiced and used hundreds of thousands of times in actual combat. Each action was unremarkable, but when connected, there was a kind of natural beauty. Looking at her beautiful hair fluttering in the wind and thunder power, her heroic demeanor of a war goddess easily infected every elf. They looked at Servanas standing on the hill with reverent and pious gazes. They were looking forward to it and waiting with excitement. They wanted to see Sylvanas, whom they had high hopes for, do something that would make them excited. However, at this moment, Servanas was actually dumbfounded. Just now, with a look from Duque, she did not think much about it and knocked the arrow. Of course, she wanted to shoot that hateful skull of Zol with one arrow, but after subconsciously putting the bow and arrow on the posture, she suddenly remembered a serious problem. She did not have the means to deal with enemies with souls. Who knew if lightning could hurt ghosts? If she could not shoot that skull with one arrow, she would really lose face in front of the ancestors of the Dark Elves. Tens of thousands of elves stared at her back with burning eyes. Those tens of thousands of gazes were nothing before, but now they were like tens of thousands of long swords. If she was not careful, she would be pierced by thousands of swords and die. Biting her fiery red lips hard, Sylvanas really wanted to die at this moment. Now it was clear that the arrow had to be shot, but, suddenly, she had a feeling of hating herself and hating Duque to death. It was not good to have such a telepathic connection with anyone, but it had to be with Duque. With a look from him, she foolishly knocked the arrow and aimed at the demon. Now it was all right. What was back field? On the other hand, seeing Sylvanas being so obedient and working with a look from him, and then embarrassed, Duque only felt that it was very interesting and funny. Duque immediately felt Sylvanas' fierce glare. She wanted him to find a way to end this. It had to be said that the three Windrunner sisters' reactions when they were embarrassed were very interesting. Sasha, the most wife-like one, had a soft pleading look in her eyes. Just looking at her made one unable to refuse. Aurelia, the most knowledgeable of the big picture, had a look of, "Little guy, why aren't you coming to help? Don't blame me if the field is ruined," with a look that moved and reasoned with him. Alright, now Sylvanas was even more direct. "Will you help me or not? If you don't blame me for flipping the table." That wildness, that arrogance, also deeply fascinated Duque. Duque smiled lightly. Even though he was more than 100 meters away from her, she still felt Duque's small movements. It was a soul that others could not see with the naked eye, a soul with a powerful holy aura. Only clergymen with the purest hearts, such as little girl Sally Whitemane, could see that a golden soul suddenly flew out of Duque's body and flew behind Sylvanas. At this moment, Sylvanas was in a standard posture of drawing a bow and knocking an arrow. Left leg in front, right leg in back. Left hand holding the bow, right hand pulling the bowstring. Others could not see it, but it did not mean that Sylvanas could not feel it. She only felt a warm soul hugging her from behind. Naturally, that was Duque's soul. This kind of embrace that was filled with ambiguity made Sylvanas flustered. Because his crotch was against her buttocks, his burning right hand lightly rested on her right hand, and his left hand gently stroked her upper left arm all the way to the fingertips of her left hand. If it were someone else, she would definitely have goosebumps all over her body and would have screamed. But that incomparably serene feeling of the warm soul made her feel very good. Chapter 8:18. Servanas' heart was tangled at the moment. For the sake of her people's hatred, even if she knew that the Lich King's body was not here, she still hoped to teach the bastard Zol a terrible lesson. On the other hand, she was very familiar with the posture of Duque holding her. When her eldest sister and third sister practiced archery in the elven forest, Duque, the bastard, often harassed her sisters with this posture, saying something about a two-man joint attack. As a result, in the end, he could not help but give a lot of dog food to the one-handed dog. And 8 out of 10 times it would make a lot of pa noise, so Servanas, who had sensitive ears and eyes, had to run a few kilometers away. In the past, Servanas hated Duque to the core. She did not expect that now she would enjoy this treatment. Duque, the bastard, was still no match. Smooth hand. Servanas was going crazy. Of course, she knew why. The 4 Windrunner sisters, except for the youngest Lilith, the first 3 sisters were about the same height. Of course, there was a difference in size, but for Duque, there was no difference. The most confusing thing for Servanas was that she used to be very disgusted, and she wanted Duque to get as far away as possible. However, it seemed that after he was saved by Dooku in the certain death situation of the sun-chasing royal court, he did not realize that his mentality had changed. Even though she was shy, even though she was a little annoyed, even though the integration at the soul level made her have an illusion of being seen naked, but the feeling was unexpectedly not too bad. She could not accept it from the bottom of her heart, but at least it was not uncomfortable. Clearly, her reason told her that this feeling seemed to be very dangerous, but her heart, her body, and her soul had a sense of anticipation to see what would happen next. Suddenly, the scene of her kissing Duque in a daze came to her mind. Damn it, what's wrong with me? Servanas cast a fierce glare at Duke diagonally behind her. Bastard, I will make you pay. Lorthamar and the others heard Servanas cursing, but they subconsciously thought that Servanas was cursing at the Lich King. It was impossible for a third party to know that she was actually scolding Duque for taking advantage of her. She steadied her footsteps and decided to ignore that bastard Duque. Her eyes were only left with the ferocious and threatening large ice-blue skull in the air. Servanas, who put away all distracting thoughts, had a grave expression on his face. His facial lines were taut, silently pursing his lips into a straight line. Zol's noisy threat still echoed over the beach. You mortals have no chance. You will all die. If you don't want your souls to be imprisoned under my throne and tortured for 10,000 years after you die, you'd better join me now. This is the last time I'm persuading you to surrender. Every elf stared at Servanas. At some point in time, this ranger general who had once left the elves had become the backbone of the surviving elves. Her every word and action would represent the whole of Sin Dorii. Now, she would take this step. After this step, she would throw the dice that would determine the fate of the entire elven race. Although he had already predicted her choice, no one knew whether the end of this path would lead to victory or destruction after placing the bet. Even so, at this moment, everyone still chose to hand the final decision to Servanas. Servanas subconsciously looked at the arrow flickering with lightning in his hand. The purplish-blue lightning actually flickered with a faint radiance under the gray and black canopy of necromancy. Every vein on the wooden shaft seemed to be wriggling like a spirit snake. It was time to hand over the answer. At this moment, as the gold coin between the fingers of Duque, divine soul slid across Servanas' arm, a burst of golden light burst from the longbow. The golden radiance extended to that long arrow, but it was wrapped within Servanas' purple-blue lightning radiance. On the hill, the elves seemed to hear the sound of a horn in a trance. That was the horn of war. That was the horn of Sin Doriai's revenge on the Scourge army. They took a deep breath. In the next moment, The long sound of the horn of war, which lingered on the beach and drifted between heaven and earth, accompanied by the sound of the bowstring, it officially sounded. A beam of light that represented the hope of the elves, and even the entire alliance, shot from the ground to the sky. It was like a ray of dawn that shone on the earth, breaking through the darkness and breaking through the dark clouds. At the same time, it shot the illusory skull that no longer had the support of the power of darkness. This arrow was like a signal flare. Then, Dooku raised his arms high and allowed the mana from the sun well branched meridian to gush out towards the sky. Previously, the arrow had only shot a hole in the cold, dark clouds. Now, the energy of the sunwell that Dooku had activated was like a pair of incomparably huge hands that tore apart the dark sky and tore it apart. Long live the Alliance! Without needing Dooku to give the order, Mograine immediately understood. He raised the Ashbringer in his hand high up. Under the guidance of this holy sword that emitted an even stronger holy light, more than 200,000 troops spread out from the entire Isle of Quell, Donnas and rushed towards the Sunwell Highland where the Sunwell was. They had thought that after the Lich King extracted a large amount of soul energy from the undead creatures, there would be no more resistance on the island. But obviously, this thought was wrong. Indeed, after Dooku killed Antonidas, the power of darkness that the Lich King had injected into the Great Lich's temporary territory had collapsed. However, with the Lich King personally taking action, the remaining power of darkness was once again scattered in all directions. Not only were the High Elves that originally guarded the island resurrected as undead, but due to the quality of these elite guards, many of them directly became Death Knights. To make matters worse, the Burning Legion seemed to have started to interfere. The sky began to rain, a green meteor shower. When they saw huge rocks wrapped in green flames falling from the sky, they first blasted a huge pit in the ground, then turned into human-shaped stone giants that were more than 10 meters tall and crawled out to attack the Alliance soldiers. A distant memory surfaced in everyone's mind. The veterans and generals who had experienced the second battle at the Dark Portal were no strangers to this scene. It was a huge demon summoned by a warlock, Hellfire. Such a terrifying demon was not something that could be defeated by conventional means. The most effective way to fight against Hellfire was holy light, followed by magic. However, the hundreds of Hellfires that should have become the new focus of the entire battlefield were quickly ignored by the Alliance soldiers. This was because a huge black pillar of light suddenly rose from the Sunwell in the north. Everyone could clearly feel an evil will rising. It was the rebirth of a great lich. Chapter 8:19. More than 200,000 people, including the soldiers of the Ku Dila's fleet, who were anxiously waiting for the results of the battle, all subconsciously raised their heads, and then their eyes widened. The black sun that rose slowly and finally hung alone in the sky made the entire Isle of Quell, Donnas, no, almost the entire earth seemed to resonate with it and tremble slightly. It was as if the end of the world had arrived. Dooku bared his teeth. Although he knew that Kel Thuzad was going to resurrect through the Sunwell, he vaguely felt that he had seen the same scene in those blinding magic blockbusters before he transmigrated. Under the illumination of the black sun, the incomparably huge base of the Sunwell rose. The next scene brought ultimate horror to Servanas and her compatriots. They saw Arthas leading a few figures towards the pool of energy that had allowed the glory of the High Elves to continue for thousands of years. Beside the most powerful Death Knight, one was real and one was translucent. Two figures were waiting for the Death Knight. Servanas recognized the guy at a glance, Dalcan Delethil. He was the one who first betrayed Kuel Salus. Then there was the Sun King, who saw that something was wrong. Dalcan's meticulously maintained hands were stained with even more blood than Arthas. Rage surged in Servanas's body. If not for Dooku raising his hand to stop her, she might have rushed forward in a moment of hot-headedness. It was too late. There was a huge spatial barrier on the Sunwell Highlands, and it was impossible to reach it in a straight line. If one did not enter from the main entrance of the Sunwell Highlands, they would never be able to reach the Sunwell. The golden light of the Sunwell, which had not been completely polluted, reflected on Arthas's face, softening his facial features and even giving him a kind of artificial warmth. Then, everyone noticed that Arthas had already inserted the infamous Frostmourne into the altar of the Sunwell. The golden energy that overflowed from the Sunwell was quickly being polluted and then being drawn back into the Sunwell. Arthas curled his lips at Duque in a show of force, then snapped his fingers. Dalcan understood at that moment. He turned a finely carved urn upside down and poured the contents into the water. The light immediately changed, pulsing, spinning, and appearing in the center of the weakening magic vortex. It was a twisted shadow. From the bony shadow, one could tell that it was the withered soul of a lich. The polluted sunwell churned with black liquid and began to climb toward the dirty souls that stepped into the sunwell. No, at this moment, many high elves burst into tears. They watched in despair as the tainted mana spread on the evil shadow. They bit their lips and could only pray for a miracle. At this moment, the entire island shook again. The shadows of two withered arms that were comparable to towering trees reached into the sky from the polluted sunwell and held the black sun in the sky. Even though Duque was already mentally prepared for this, even though he had already made up his mind to reap the benefits, he was still stunned at this moment. The huge shadow of the back of the hand pulled the entire black sun into its embrace. The dirty sun shrunk at a speed visible to the naked eye, becoming more and more concentrated. Finally, it sank into the evil figure standing in the black well water. At this moment, Kel Thuzad's figure finally broke the boundary between soul and body, returning to the world of Azeroth. It was a horned skeleton with an evil smile. Its eye sockets were burning with flames, and its body was surrounded by snake-like chains. Its purple robe fluttered with its every move. Kel Thuzad looked up and laughed. Just as the Lich King promised, I have been reborn. He has given me true immortality. Servanas, Lor, Themar, Hadgeron, Rietaline, and all the high elves looked at Kel Thuzad in disbelief. Everything was just for this? All the slaughter, torture, and terror, just to resurrect a lich? The precious Sunwell, which was related to the fate of an entire race, was tainted with filth. The way of life that had lasted for thousands of years was destroyed. Just for this? What kind of joke was this? Servanas took a deep breath and shouted with the loudest voice she could muster, "Advance! Attack!" Every high elf glared angrily at the great lich who was laughing shrilly. The only thing that comforted them was that this damned lich would be destroyed once again. There was also Darkan, who had betrayed his own people and used the Sunwell as a gift to flatter his new master. Only by turning his corpse into ashes and throwing his soul into hell to roast for 1,000,000 years would they be able to vent their hatred. In the west, the Alliance's army was also charging under Mograine's lead. However, as the core of the Alliance and the High Elves, Duque stopped and slowly sat down. "Duque, how are you?" Duque didn't need to look up to know that it was his personal maid, Vanessa. He smiled bitterly. "I'm fine. It's just that using the Sunwell's mana continuously is a bit too much of a burden on my body." "Duque, are you alright? Is the commander injured?" Jaina and Abendis followed closely behind. One had flashed over, and the other had rushed over on horseback. "I'm fine. Let Mograine go first. However, I don't think Earthies will fight us head-on." Duque clutched his chest, his breathing a little rapid. Jaina noticed that the air that Duque exhaled was much hotter than a normal person's. It was almost at the level of steam. Duque had guessed correctly. Arthes was strong, but he had never thought of fighting the Alliance's main force head-on after losing all of his subordinates. The undead army that he had brought this time had been directly transported over by the Sunwell's mana vein. Now that the Sunwell had been polluted, the stability of the energy vein was naturally non-existent. There was no way to continue replenishing troops. After fighting for so long, the Alliance and the Doomsday Army both knew that due to the strength of their souls and the degree of corruption, the new undead army's combat power was limited. While the Doomsday Army could nurture their troops through battle, they still needed a lot of time to nurture and adjust to become the true powerhouses of the undead race. Arthes's retreat was inevitable. As expected, Arthes's laughter could be heard. "Ha ha ha. Duke Marcus. This time, it's my victory. I'm very curious if you still have the courage to stand in front of us when we reveal our final trump card." A huge space portal appeared under Kel Thuzad's spell. It would take time for the army to charge over. Just like that, a huge battle that could have happened ended hastily. This wasn't a matter of regret, because Arthes and Duke had already obtained what they wanted. Chapter 820. The history of the alliance could be divided into two stages. The first one was the Seven Kingdoms, which at the time seemed united but were actually divided, as the core of the alliance. The second stage was what Duke and the other players were familiar with. It was the fusion of many races and became more and more powerful. People often said that the old tribes were cruel and bloodthirsty. They slaughtered villages and cities everywhere they went. The old tribes that killed millions of humans were trash. In Duque's opinion, the old alliance, which was the former Lordaeron alliance, was not a good thing either. When the initial momentum of working together to fight against the Horde passed, the countries immediately became small alliances based on their own national interests. At that time, the seemingly fair but actually greedy leader, Tyrrhena's Menethil, led the way for his own interests. As the saying went, if the upper beam was not straight, the lower beam would be crooked. It was no wonder that the countries led by Kuel, Salus and Gilnas could not take it anymore and left the alliance. It turned out that the High Elves in history had their own bad side, but Kael, that's led the Blood Elves back into the alliance and was looked down upon. Hence, the elves could not be blamed for that. If not for Arthas's Scourge army sweeping through the entire Lordaeron continent in the north and getting rid of those old bastard kings who occupied the latrine, there would not have been King Varian. King Varian, who was nicknamed King Varian by the players, would not have become a hero and leader of the alliance. The appearance of the Scourge army was a catastrophe. From another point of view, without the Calamity army, the public enemy of the world, there wouldn't have been a purer alliance. As for the Horde, if they were unhappy with the chief, they could challenge him directly. If they won, the chief's throne would be theirs. Those in the alliance would not be as violent as the Horde. Duque could not kill Anastrian, Tyrrhena's, or even Antonidas himself. This meant that Duque could only do it through Arthas's hands. Duque was very clear that this method was a little troublesome. It was much more comfortable to think about it from the other side. There was no rainbow without wind and rain. It was precisely because of Arthas's help that Duque could make a name for himself in the alliance. Standing on the hill of the Isle of Quel, Donnas and overlooking the whole island, it was a mess. The attack of the Doomsday army not only destroyed everything on the island, but also turned all the elite guards into immortals. No one dared to be careless with this batch of undead that had been resurrected by the Lich King. They had the clergymen specially clean the corpses with holy water and purify their souls before burying them. It wasn't a burial, but a water burial, typical of the sea nation Kul Tiras. Thousands of corpses were neatly lined up on makeshift rafts and slowly drifted to the distant ocean with the power of the tide. On the shore, tens of thousands of high elves were sobbing. As the representatives of the alliance, Duque, Mograine, Abendus, and Servanas stood side by side on the rostrum, silently observing the ceremony. "Get ready to fire," Theron raised her hand, and the rangers lined up on the shore shot the fire arrows onto the raft filled with flammable materials. Flames soared into the sky, accompanied by the burning corpses and the unique flute music of the High Elves. The boys and girls of the High Elves held each other's hands and sang a mournful requiem. The dead were gone, but there were still many important things for the living to do. In the largest military tent of the Alliance, everyone's shoulders were under heavy pressure, and they felt as if they couldn't breathe. First of all, we thank the Alliance for forgiving the past and allowing us, the High Elves, to return to the embrace of the Alliance. Here, the entire Kuel Salus National Salvation Committee formally expresses our deep gratitude to the Alliance. Servanas and the few remaining big shots bowed deeply to Duque. The High Elves also knew that now that the Well of the Sun had been polluted and the entire kingdom had collapsed, they would really be wiped out if they didn't hold on to the Alliance. At the very least, they had to show enough respect. Fighting against the evil Calamity army is something that every living person on the continent should do. I hope that Kuel Salus can quickly sort out its internal affairs and send elite troops to join the alliance. The alliance urgently needs the power of the High Elves, Rangers and high-level mages, Duque replied in official language. Where is the alliance going to attack next? Lord Themar asked first. Duque glanced at Mograine and the other Lordaeron people beside him and nodded. We will first go south through the Long Song forest and meet up with the army of Turayan and Saidan Dathrahan. Since we can't protect the entire continent, we must at least ensure that the plague does not spread further. Recently, it has been called the Eastern Plague Lands. This is not just for the people of Lordaeron, but for everyone else. Unlike the original history, the Calamity Army was directly teleported to the High Elves this time. Instead, the holy city of Stratholme was saved. Since Duque's main force was the Scarlet Cross, he naturally had to follow the will of the people and protect a small part of the old Lordaeron territory. At this time, Abendus also reported, now, the entire Tirisful Glades and Silverpine Forest have been occupied by the undead. According to the latest statistics, we conservatively estimate that there are more than 5 million undead in the old Dalajan territory, and we can't rule out the possibility of more than 10 million. Also, the proportion of mid-level and high-level undead seems to be gradually increasing. This number made the High Elves' faces twitch. How many soldiers could the Alliance muster now? Including the poorly trained militia, 1 million was the most they could muster. Not every soldier could fight as well as the paladins. It would be a miracle if they could muster 1 paladin out of 100 ordinary soldiers. The numbers in front of them really made all the living despair. Fortunately, most of the undead were zombies and skeleton soldiers, and there were not many ghouls. If they were all Death Knights, they might as well just kill themselves and pledge their loyalty to the Lich King. Abendus continued, it's not that there is no good news. Our former chief commander, His Excellency Anduin Lothar, has reappeared. He led Bolvar Fordragon's Stormwind main force and has already met up with the main force of the Iron Furnace Fort. They are preparing to launch a cross-sea attack and a bridge attack to recover the Arthi Highlands. The situation was very clear. The big shots of the Alliance hoped that in the near future, the two armies would meet up, one from the northeast to the southwest. The other was south, and then they would meet up in the Dalajan territory to drive the Calamity Army out of Lordaeron. Only Duque sighed. There was no need to go through so much trouble. As long as Archimonde escaped, the war in Lordaeron would come to an end. He deliberately opened up the entire western line of defense of the entire continent, just to let Arthas and Archimonde quickly leave. The pointless discussion soon ended. A new shock appeared. Servana's expression changed several times. What? You want me to be the queen? Chapter 8:21. There was a relatively intact luxurious villa in the west of Silvermoon City. Because the original owner had followed Sun King and joined the Scourge army as a lich, there was no more suitable house nearby. In the end, the National Rescue Committee used it as a temporary headquarters. In the largest room on the 3rd floor, Servanas received the biggest unexpected news since the Scourge army's invasion. Arthas's invasion did not scare Servanas. Darkin's despicable betrayal did not scare Servanas. Even his own king taking the lead to join the Lich King could not stop Servanas's advancement. However, at this moment, the battle outside easily frightened Servanas. Originally, it was normal to have a lot of people in the headquarters. However, with Sun King's betrayal, the prince's exile, and the Silvermoon Council's complete collapse, all the situations in the entire kingdom had to be gathered here for approval. The injured needed treatment. The previous sea burial was only for the dead on the Isle of Quel Danas. In the kingdom itself, more dead needed to be purified and buried. A large number of undead were running around, so they needed to send out cleanup teams. Then there was the spread of the plague and signs of instability in the polluted Sunwell. Everything was complicated, but Servanas was someone who had seen a lot of things before. Hunt the undead to Hadgeron. Treat the injured and purify to Liadeline. Search for the remaining enemies to his 4th sister. The internal affairs were left to the smartest Lord Themar. The Scourge army had destroyed almost everything. The entire Kuel Salis lacked everything: medicine, food, tents, clean water. If you lack anything, just go to Duque and ask him for it. Tell him that I said it. Servanas showed off her power, and it really worked. Even though the elves were so anxious that they almost used robbing, the Alliance's quartermaster pinched their noses and accepted it. After all, Servanas was the rumored sister-in-law of Duque. For 3 consecutive days, when the situation in the country was stabilized, Servanas, who hadn't slept for 3 days and 3 nights, was suddenly startled by the shouts coming from outside. The elves of the National Rescue Committee were also shocked. Servanas took the lead to rush out with his longbow and short sword. In the end, he saw an extremely shocking scene. Many elves came from all directions, and they all came to the small villa. Lady Servanas Windrunner. Can you come out for a second? We need your leadership. At a glance, there were at least 2,000 to 3,000 elves here, and the number was still increasing. Servanas directly stabbed his dagger into the wooden railing of the balcony on the 3rd floor, shouting domineeringly, "If you need instructions, I believe you've already received clear instructions. If there's anything you lack, you can tell me or every member of the National Salvation Committee. If you're confident in your abilities, you can also recommend yourself to join the National Salvation Committee. What are you guys doing here? We still have many compatriots who need your help and rescue. Our kingdom needs the strength of each and every one of you. No, we need you." A ranger captain stood up. Servanas recognized him. Devon had been with her for more than 1,000 years. He had fought trolls, fought orcs, and fought against catastrophes. He could be said to be a veteran on her side. Servanas was also stunned to see him come out. Devon continued to shout, "There's a rumor that after you've quelled the troubles of the kingdom, you'll return to your fief in the elven forest." Servanas was suddenly stunned. She really hadn't thought about this in the face of a national crisis. She used to think that when she gave up her duties in the Marcus family and ran back to the Long Song forest, she would be separated from Duque and Duque's forces. Now it seemed that it was not the case at all. Duque had never regarded her as a traitor. Moreover, there was that kiss, and that arrow from the 2 of them. Unexpectedly, her hesitation immediately caused the elves below to burst into an uproar. Woo-woo. The rumor is actually true. Even our only remaining hero is going to abandon us? Who can lead us out of this desperate situation? It used to be trolls, last time it was orcs, and now it's bones. Oh my god, there's also the Burning Legion. Is Kuel Salis really going to perish? Pessimism spread faster than the plague, and hundreds of female elves almost burst into tears on the spot. Servanas was anxious. I didn't say I was going to leave. As long as my comrades need me, as long as the Long Song forest still needs me, I will not leave. But you've already left once. Devon's loud shout was like throwing a torch into a warehouse of explosives. The audience below suddenly exploded. Yes. 13 years ago, because of the King and the Silvermoon Council, the Windrunner sisters suffered the most unfair treatment. Although on the surface it was Duque who extorted the Windrunner sisters to leave, the elves generally believed that the king and the council had joined forces to force away the hero who was an eyesore to the higher-ups. No, don't leave us. We need you. Lady Servanas, at this moment, someone shouted, "Stay. Since the Sunstrider is such a bastard, you can be our queen." This sentence seemed to wake people up from a dream. Queen? Yes, queen. This is a great idea. Why didn't we think of it? Yes. Queen, queen. Queen. Queen, long live Her Majesty, Queen Servanas. Long live Her Majesty, Queen Servanas. Unknowingly, the elves shouted more and more in unison. The number was spectacular, and the scene was shocking. In the beginning, there were dozens of people, then hundreds, and finally thousands of people shouted in unison. Their voices were so loud that they resounded through the sky. This huge sound wave even spread out of Silvermoon City to the open space outside the city that was full of tents. In just a few moments, even outside the city, people shouted, "Long live Her Majesty, Queen Servanas," at the same time. At this moment, Servanas was dumbfounded. From the moment she decided to come back to save the country, she didn't think about it anymore. To Servanas, protecting her motherland and her beloved forest was as natural as eating and drinking. She never thought that she would one day sit on the supreme throne because of this. In her imagination, power was something extremely distant. After all, when she came back, she had the entire Silvermoon Council and the Sunstrider father and son above her. Who would have thought that she would one day ascend the throne that everyone looked forward to? She was frightened. He was really frightened. She had faced countless powerful enemies and wandered between life and death more than once. She had never felt such fear toward trolls, orcs, or even Great Lich Anastrian, who had once been her king. At this moment, she was truly frightened. She shrank back like an ostrich. She quickly retreated and closed the door to the balcony in one smooth motion. Escape was shameful, but it was useful. Chapter 822. Phew. 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 Servanas leaned against the wall next to the balcony's glass door as she gasped for air. Just a short moment ago, she was already drenched in cold sweat. Sweat stuck her beautiful blonde hair into clumps, and bean-sized sweat droplets flowed down her sexy collarbone and toned chest, all the way to the deep ravine. If Duque was here at this moment, he would definitely have a feast for his eyes. Unfortunately, at this moment, there was only Lilith, who had just returned to rest. Lilith tilted her head, and with a blank expression, she blinked and said, "Second sister, what are you afraid of? They won't kill you. Is being a queen so scary?" This joke was very cold, and Servanas was awakened by this cold joke. Oh my God, what was I afraid of just now? Following the voice, the call of Her Majesty, Queen Servanas, became louder and louder. Lightly biting her red lips, Servanas used a very awkward reason to dodge her sister's question. A windrunner should never be bound by anything? Bound? Big sister has been a ranger general for thousands of years. Is that considered a binding? Or is it also a binding for big sister and third sister to fall in love with Duque? When fourth sister mentioned Duque, Servanas' face could not help but turn red. Perhaps it was because Lilith lacked a brain when it came to relationships. This kind of emotionless conversation made Servanas' teeth hurt even more. Would doing what he wanted to do become a kind of restraint? Servanas' delicate face twitched involuntarily. Let me calm down for a moment. A few minutes later, when the noise outside reached the sky, an angry roar came from the committee's command center. "Lord Thema, get in here." Lord Thema, who was hiding in the alley 3 houses away, could not help but smile bitterly. As expected, there are no idiots in the Windrunner family. In the command division's underground cellar, the sharp voices and shouts decreased by more than 80%. The air was filled with a rich alcohol fragrance, but those fellas here weren't in the mood to enjoy this intoxicating fragrance. Servanas leaned on her longbow and leaned against the wall of the cellar in a seemingly casual manner, but her entire body exuded a powerful and dignified aura. A few of them shuddered as soon as they came in and subconsciously shrank their heads. Is everyone here? All right, Lorthamar, come clean. What the hell are you doing? As long as the woman from the Windrunner family found her target, there was nothing she couldn't hit. Now that he had been singled out, Lorthamar couldn't even pretend to be a grandson anymore. Just as he was about to say something, Hadgeron spoke first. We agreed to make you our queen, big sister. What about us? Servanas' gaze sharpened, and the dozen or so fellows at the very front all felt like they had been turned into a beehive by a rain of arrows. Me. Me. Me too. Without hesitation or retreating, a large group of people stepped forward. Servanas really choked. She never thought that this us actually included all the ranger captains she had led before. From the senior captains to the junior captains, there were at least 30 of them. You. What are you doing? Did you think about how I feel when you suddenly did this? Now I'm like a despicable thief who came back from thousands of miles away to steal the throne. She punched the wall of the cellar with her small fist. With the addition of the strength from the well-tempered hero to your body, this punch cracked the wall as if it had been smashed by a meteor hammer. A spider web-like crack spread out half a meter. Instead of retreating, Hageron took a step forward and said loudly, "Thief! How could there be a thief in the Windrunner family? Big sister, you're the one who's underestimating yourself now. We're not forcing you." Hageron interrupted, "We didn't see any thief." "Did you see?" With a wave of his hand, the surrounding area was immediately filled with the aura of 100 responding to a single call. "No. How could there be a power thief? Big sister, you're thinking too much. We're not blind." That's right. Hageron continued, "We only saw a guy called Dalcan betray Kuel Salas first. We also saw the man who used to be our king betray us in the face of powerful evil. Even Prince Kale, that's our last hope, betrayed us." Following Hageron's words, Lord Themar, who had been silent until now, also took 2 steps forward. However, in the end, when all of us were in pain and despair, a ranger called Servana's Windrunner stepped forward and became our hope, our pillar of support. She led us in a desperate charge against Arthas. "No. I'm not strong enough. My sister." "Yes. Aurelia is much stronger than me," Servanas argued. Riadaline suddenly said, "Perhaps Lady Aurelia is stronger than you." But at that moment it was you who appeared in front of the High Elves, not your sister or sister. Servanas was speechless for a moment. Then, she immediately said, "That's not necessarily true. I can temporarily lead everyone, but if we form a parliament in the future, won't we all be able to choose a more suitable leader?" "No. No one is more suitable than you," Hageron said firmly. He raised his hand and pointed above his head. "Do you hear everyone? Almost all the High Elves who can still move are here." Lord Themar took 2 more steps forward. He was so close that his nose was almost touching Servana's forehead. He waved his arms vigorously, using his body language to express his excitement. "Whether we want to admit it or not, Kuel Salas has already collapsed. The plague has spread throughout the kingdom, and 80% of our land has been corroded. We can't even afford to feed 50,000 people. Maybe we can do it after we purify the land. But that's in the future. Now, we must evacuate most of our people, just like how we evacuated north during Stormwind. Servanas, other than you, there is no one else who can be the bridge between Sin Dorii and the Alliance. Remember. There is no one else." Servana's body trembled. She understood everything. Helping her rise to power. It could be said that it was fate, but it could also be said that it was inevitable. In a situation where the higher-ups were all killed and even betrayed, the people needed a new pillar of support psychologically. Materially, the kingdom's collapse forced the entire kingdom to seek help from the Alliance in order to prevent a large number of people from starving to death. Chapter 8:23. For thousands of years, the High Elves prided themselves on their nobility and pursued a high degree of isolationism and xenophobia. Not to mention the constant friction with Lordaeron, even the other humans and the Dwarf Kingdom didn't give them any face. It wasn't to say that they had the whole world as their enemy, but they had offended a lot of people. The High Elven Kingdom's favorability with other countries was in the negative. It didn't matter when the High Elven Kingdom was strong, but now that the High Elven Kingdom had collapsed, the High Elven Kingdom didn't have a good time either. If the High Elven Kingdom was fine, even if Kuel Salas and his family collapsed, the High Elves might be able to get more material support. But now, Lordaeron was almost destroyed. Less than a third of its original vast territory was left, the so-called Eastern Plains. Of course, more people now called it the Eastern Plaguelands. The Dalajan Kingdom was also destroyed. 1/3 of its mages ran away. None of the former members of the High Elven Kingdom had a good time. Alterac zombies ran all over the mountains. Stromgard also collapsed, torrential fortress fell, and even King Galan was turned into an immortal. Gilnas, at first, Gilnas still had the Greymane Wall and continued to play isolationist. During the first Dalajan battle, Duque sent messengers to Gilnas for help, but was rejected by King Xian Greymane. However, the Scourge didn't let this isolated country go. One of the main forces attacked the Greymane Wall when Duque was trying to evacuate the people of Lordaeron. The latest news was that King Xian was forced to use Archmage Erigel to fight against the invasion of the Scourge, summoning werewolves. Although Erigel's werewolves seemed to be repelling the invasion of the Scourge, they also attacked the surviving people of Lordaeron and Gilnas in the Silverpine Forest. Moreover, the werewolf virus was spreading among them. The members of the High Elven Kingdom couldn't even take care of themselves. How could they have the energy to care about a race that was originally extremely xenophobic in the far north? If there was anyone in the High Elven Kingdom who could get the resources of the High Elven Kingdom, it would be the Windrunner sisters. As everyone knew, the Windrunner's eldest and third sisters were about to change their surnames to Marcus. Originally, the Ranger's goddess, Sylvanas, seemed to have escaped from Duque's demonic clutches. Unfortunately, it was soon proven that it was nothing more than a beautiful illusion. The two of them kissed in front of the Sunstrider royal court stairs. Although it seemed like an illusion and he couldn't see it clearly, how could an advanced ranger's perception be fooled so easily? Moreover, if it was really nothing, as the Grand Duke of Stormwind and the highest commander of the Alliance, why would he take the risk to save a random ranger general? I don't have a close relationship with Duque. Sylvanas seemed to be on the verge of breaking down, but he still tried to defend himself. This time, no one refuted her, but everyone had an expression that said, "I don't care if you believe it or not, I don't believe it." Fortunately, Lord Themar and the others had been with the Windrunner family for many years. He knew their personalities very well. The other guys still wanted to persuade them, but Lord Thema stepped on the brakes. All right. We're not purposely forcing you, but please calm down and think about it. We'll leave first and give you some time and space." As soon as he said this, the group of guys immediately became clear-headed. It might be very effective to deal with Aurelia. As for Sylvanas, it was a little difficult. For the second sister of the Windrunner family, who was known as the most rebellious person, leaving behind a mess and not doing anything was also one of the options. Lady Sylvanas Windrunner understands everyone's good intentions. She promises to seriously consider your suggestions and give an answer as soon as possible. However, our compatriots are still suffering, and we have more urgent things to do. Please disperse first. If there's any news, the National Salvation Committee will definitely inform you as soon as possible. Lord Themar announced to the elves outside. Didn't it sound wrong? Thinking about it, the thousands of elves gathered outside were instigated by Lord Themar. She naturally had the ability to appease everyone first. If anything happened to Sylvanas, this fellow might immediately launch a petition of 100,000 people. As soon as they drove everyone away, Lord Themar grabbed Hadgeron's collar. "Keep an eye on Big Sis. If she wants to leave Kuel Salis, you have to hold her back even if you die. We can only play the emotional card now." "Yes. I understand." Hadgeron nodded vigorously. What they did not know was that the four Windrunner sisters' hearing was no longer what it used to be after being strengthened by the Storm Altar. Two blue veins in the shape of a cross popped out on Sylvanas' forehead. At this moment, she even wanted to kill her lackey. Lilith tilted her head. "Second sister, I actually think you should ask Duque for his opinion." Sylvanas was a little annoyed. Why ask him? Duque is a very thoughtful human. Look, that Jaina claimed to be Duque's fiancée, but she never got any benefits. But he takes good care of us elves. Since Lord Themar wants to use us to clear the Alliance, they need Duque to help them. Lilith did not say much, but she hit the nail on the head. Before Kuel Salis was attacked, Sylvanas and Duque hadn't seen each other for 10 years. 10 years was nothing for elves, but it could change a lot for humans. He seemed to be on good terms with big sis and third sister. What about her? Speaking of which, how would she settle the mess between them? Sylvanas' mind was in a mess. Taking a deep breath, she decided to secretly meet Duque. In the past 3 days, Duque had been very busy. Apart from arranging for the Alliance to send people to help with the disaster and arrange for hundreds of thousands of Scarlet Cross soldiers to enter the eastern plague lands through Longsong Forest to support Stratholme, he also had to keep a close eye on the Sunwell. In history, the Sunwell had been forced to be blown up because it was too corrupted. But there were some things that a human like Duque could not meddle in. The High Elves' holy relic could only be decided by the High Elves themselves. The only thing Duque could do was to ask Dellen's old lover, the Radiant Moon Elven mage Gina Goldsword, to keep an eye on the Sunwell. When it couldn't hold on any longer, it would be the moment for Duque to show up. With the help of the system, he used inner vision to sense his magic circuits. The circuit had more than doubled in size compared to before he came to quell the loss. The flow rate and quantity of magic power had increased exponentially, but there was still a long way to go before a qualitative change. Duque heaved a sigh. I just have to wait for the Sunwell. Suddenly, Vanessa knocked on the door. Master, Miss Sylvanas wants to see you. Huh? Duque was slightly stunned. Chapter 824. It wasn't that Duque was bragging, but he had been really close to Sylvanas. From the first year of the Dark Portal, when the Windrunner's eldest and second sisters had supported Southshore, to when the Windrunner family had been lured to Elven Forest, to when Karazhan had been blown up 5 years after the Dark Portal, Duque had seen her at least 800 times, if not 1,000. Later on, because he often fooled around with Aurelia and Winrisa, she seemed to hate him, and their meetings had gradually decreased. In his memory, every time they met, as long as Duque was in the house, Sylvanas would never walk through the front door. When had she not relied on her unimaginably high agility to jump in through the window? What was a notice? Could a notice be eaten? Obviously, Vanessa was also shocked. It could be heard from her tone of voice. Because Silvermoon City had been destroyed, plague and death were everywhere. Other than the rescue team, the Alliance had to board the ship again at Quell, Donna's Island, pass through the original Windrunner Tower in the southwest of Longsong Forest, and take the southern mountain road to the plague. Only a small number of logistics troops and Duque and other higher-ups were arranged outside the northwest gate of Silvermoon City. Duque also lived in a villa that originally belonged to the Silvermoon Council. Invite her in. Not long after Duque gave the order, he heard the sound of knight-errant boots coming from the corridor outside. Duque was a little stunned, and then he was stunned when he saw Sylvanas. Damn it. What was going on tonight? Why was she suddenly wearing formal dress for a banquet? Wasn't it the sound of boots just now? Windwalkers loved nature, and at the same time, they pursued high agility. If it wasn't for the magic armor that could increase their body's speed and agility, they might have chosen to wear bikinis on the battlefield. According to them, this way they could feel the flow of the wind better. So seeing the sexy and exquisite collarbones, the Windrunner cleavage, and the soft and bouncy waist, it was a blessing for Duque, and almost became the stereotype of the 4 Windrunner sisters in his mind. Suddenly seeing Sylvanas wearing formal clothes, Duque was not used to it. Although it was still very amazing. The black, low-cut fishtail skirt paired with a white blouse made her look both solemn and sexy. She seemed to have washed her hair in order to meet Duque, and her blonde hair was put up in a neat bun. The only thing that gave Duque a headache was that ladies usually wore low-cut dresses. In order to prevent their chests from looking too empty, they would wear a necklace with gemstones or something. What was the meaning of Sylvanas wearing a Dark Portal Warrior's badge as a necklace? After Vanessa opened the door for her, Sylvanas looked a little embarrassed. She stood in the doorway, dignified and impeccable, except that the fingers of her hands, which were neatly placed on her abdomen, were furtively pinching each other with the fingers of her right and left hands. Duque smiled awkwardly. I heard that time means nothing to the High Elves. If you could treat my room as your own like you did 10 years ago, perhaps you and I would be more comfortable. Then, should I go back and change my clothes now? Duque's face was full of embarrassment. Am I imagining things? Why does it feel like Queen Sylvanas' intelligence has dropped? Duque looked up at the darkening night outside the window. It's getting late. Come in. Just say what you want. Sylvanas walked in with her ladylike little steps. It had to be said that in the past 10 years, Duque's invention of high heels had become popular throughout the Eastern Kingdom, earning a lot of money from ladies. It wasn't that this trend had not reached the closed Kuel Salis. It should be said that high heels were a rare case of human cultural invasion. At this moment, Duque looked at Sylvanas in ranger boots and evening dress and felt that it was a little out of place. What's wrong with me? The female ranger seemed to be extraordinarily sensitive. Taking care of her complicated emotions, Duque snapped his fingers. Vanessa, pick a pair of things from box 7. Not long after, the now mature maid elegantly presented a pair of black high heels inlaid with glittering glass ornaments. Sylvanas's face turned red. Because she only wanted to come back and fight, she didn't even bring a pair of shoes for the banquet. She had been preparing for battle the moment she returned to the forest. In the end, when she wanted to wear a formal dress, even this evening dress had to be borrowed by Lilith, and she couldn't find suitable shoes. She knew at a glance that the shoes would definitely suit her. She was a little angry. It was obvious that the shoes were for her sister, since all 3 sisters had the same size. Vanessa explained calmly, I didn't know when the 2 matriarchs would return, so I brought a lot of their things when I came to meet Master. But since you're sisters, I don't think you'll mind. Sylvanas glared. She wanted to say, I mind, but she didn't have the strength to do so. She wanted to change herself. It was indeed impolite to wear an evening dress with long boots, but she immediately gave up. Women's evening gowns in this era, be it elves or humans, all had a characteristic, and that was the insanely narrow waist. In order to accentuate a woman's slim waist, it was definitely enough to shift a woman's internal organs when it was tightened. Her waist was thin in the first place, but with Lilith's help, she couldn't even bend herself. She could only ask Vanessa to help her change into the high heels with a bitter smile. After Vanessa left, only Duque and the hot black tea that Vanessa had just served were left in the room. She took a sip and calmed herself down, but she didn't know where to start. As if her brain was cramping, she suddenly said, the high elves seem to want to make me their queen. She regretted it almost as soon as she said it. Oh my God. What am I saying? Am I showing off? Duque smiled. That's right. The elves are very lively. I can hear them from half the city ruins. I. Taking a deep breath, Sylvanas finally said loudly, do you have no opinion on this? Even she didn't know why, but she seemed to care a lot about Duque's opinion. Duque smiled calmly and replied without malice, well, do you want me to congratulate you? Well, congratulations. Your passion and loyalty to the kingdom have finally won everyone's approval. The calmer Duque was, the more Sylvanas felt like he couldn't hold back his emotions. Not knowing what to say, she suddenly said, are you really capable of prophecy? I clearly remember that you accidentally called me Queen Sylvanas more than once. Huh? This time, Duque was stunned. Chapter 825. If a person wanted to lie, there were 2 kinds of people he could not hide it from. One was his enemy, who knew him better than he did, and the other was the people around him. From the end of the second battle of the Dark Portal until the second invasion of Zul, Duque had lived a happy life. When people were not under pressure, their nerves were not so tense, and they would not have too many scruples. Big secrets could be kept, but small secrets still had a chance to be leaked. Duque did not know how to talk in his sleep, but he had seen Sylvanas too many times, and he was used to calling her Queen Sylvanas before he crossed over, so he would always spill the beans. In the past, he could just laugh it off, but now there was Mediva's prediction of the invasion of the Scourge army, and Duque's ability to predict the future. Now, Queen Sylvanas suddenly asked one of Duque's Achilles' heel. There was no point in denying it. For a person with such amazing intuition, any disguise would be seen through in an instant. Duque flung his robe, revealing a sage-like appearance. He looked serious, and Sylvanas was stunned. It was 36 years ago, on a clear and cloudy night. The clock was at 13:61, and I suddenly heard a rumbling sound. It was the sound of the sky. Suddenly, a very pleasant neutral voice sounded in my ear, and it told me a shocking secret. That is, after 36 years, Sylvanas Windrunner will be crowned queen. Duke began to talk nonsense with a straight face, and at first he did frighten the queen. Although Queen Sylvanas's intelligence at the moment was a little touching, she immediately came to her senses. There were too many things to complain about. In this world, Duque's official announcement to the public was that he was only 19 years old before he disappeared. Now that he had eternal life and age had no meaning, the authorities believed that Duque was a 29-year-old guy who was about to step into the ranks of middle-aged uncles. Then 36 years ago, what the hell was that? 13:61 at night? The sound of the sky? Are you sure it wasn't me being struck by lightning? What secret? Sylvanas was furious. He subconsciously rushed over and grabbed Duque's collar. Duque, you bastard. Enough. I'm asking you a serious question. How dare you brush me off? But she soon realized that something was wrong. Her actions were too unladylike and too intimate. If they weren't very close, how could they grab each other's clothes so casually? I'm... She wanted to apologize on the spot, but the index finger of a mage's hand gently pressed against her red lips. A second later, Duque replaced the magic finger with his right index finger. Duque shook his head. You don't need to apologize. Don't you think this is the original you? I don't remember estranging you to this extent. But you and big sister and third sister disappeared for 10 years. I almost forgot about you. Moreover, I have also returned the territorial documents and the aristocratic badge. I betrayed the Marcus family. In the field of politics, this could be said to be a very serious betrayal. In the human world, the allegiance of hereditary nobles was eternal. Unless the great lord voluntarily removed the title of nobles, or there was absolute evidence that the lord was dead and the next lord announced the removal of allegiance, this monarch and vassal relationship was permanent. In fact, even if the great lord released the person, such a removal would be regarded as a disgrace to the lower nobles. Strictly speaking, it was the right thing for the Marcus family to scold Sylvanas as a traitor and launch a crusade against her. Duque said slowly, betrayal? I don't remember Elohia, who acted as a director for me, issuing a notice that you are a traitor to the family. I also don't think an elf who defends his country and hometown is a traitor to his country and people. It was me who abducted you and your sister by small means. You just did what you had to do. This was already a classic example of repaying evil with good. In that situation at the time, so what if he was the hero of Cule Salus? He slapped the Sun King and the Silvermoon Council in the face. So what if Big Sister proved that she was right? Wouldn't he still have to make things difficult for him later? He might even find a reason to torture him to death. At this moment, Sylvanas finally couldn't help but cry out. Unconsciously, she cried out and threw herself into Duque's arms, crying non-stop. Bastard! Why are you so good to us sisters? Why are you so good to me after you have big sister and third sister? Bastard! 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 Did you foresee all this and then do it on purpose? You deliberately came to save me at the most critical moment and made me confused. You deliberately took the opportunity to make me a queen or something. Well, Queen Sylvanas, at least you got a lot of it right. How is it possible? I am not a god. Duque smiled bitterly. The original history of this world had been messed up by him. It seemed that Queen Sylvanas still became a queen, but she was no longer the forgotten queen of death. Who would have thought that after saving Sylvanas, she would still have such a queen's life? She couldn't be the queen of the Forsaken, but was determined to be the queen of the High Elves? In all honesty, I don't have the ability to persuade your old subordinates. I haven't even come into contact with them. Heroes were all terrifying existences with amazing intuition. Feeling that Duque wasn't lying, Queen Servanas seemed to feel a little better. She lowered her head and fell silent. However, when she raised her head a few seconds later, Duque was startled. It was because what appeared before him was a Servanas whose gaze was like lightning, his gaze sharp, and not the foolish girl from before who was in a complete mess. She took a deep breath. Well, Duke Marcus. I have to admit that for the past 10 years, I have been looking for a partner stronger than you, to surpass Big Sister and Third Sister. This idea was wrong. Her eyes seemed to have a magical power that attracted Duque's gaze. I refuse to admit my heart. This is the demon in my heart that prevented me from improving for more than 10 years. Well, I now announce that I, Servanas Windrunner, have fallen in love with you, Duque. Even if this may be a mistake, or the result of someone's calculation, my feelings at this moment tell me that I really have fallen in love with you. Queen Sylvie admitted it so openly and took the initiative to confess. Duke was surprised, but also made his heart beat wildly. Wait. Before you answer, I must ask you to answer my question seriously. Servanas suddenly rolled up her skirt, pulled out a dagger from the inside of her thigh, and pressed it against Duque's neck. If you answer wrong, I will probably kill you on the spot, and then kill myself to accompany you. Servanas was so unyielding, and her momentum was so shocking that it directly frightened Duque. Chapter 826. Duque was a little surprised, and also had a headache. Sure enough, should he say that Queen Sylvanas deserved to be called Queen Sylvanas? Brave, rebellious, and full of wisdom. In history, Queen Sylvanas could protect her home and defend her country. She risked her life to stop Arthas in the Long Song Forest. In the end, she was killed because she could not defeat him. She was even turned into a banshee of death, and finally became the Queen of the Forsaken. She could be crazy about what she was determined to do. On the other hand, she seemed to be very reserved when it came to feelings. He had known Sylvanas for 15 years, but Duque had never felt that she liked him. Although he was a bastard from time to time, he would accidentally show off their love and abuse a single dog like her, but heaven and earth could testify that Duke really did not have the intention to deliberately abuse her heart or seduce his sister-in-law. As for saving her. Nonsense, if he really let her die in Kuel's Salis, Aurelia and Sasha would come back and hate him for the rest of their lives. Who would have thought that after saving her, he would immediately kiss her with a heavenly thunder and earthly fire? In fact, at the moment in front of the sun-chasing king court, Duque was distracted. Damn! I have been through so much hardship to be reborn here, and I have worked so hard to be a hero. Do I still want to be a single dog for the rest of my life? I already have a pair of sisters, in for a penny, in for a pound, in for a pound, in for a pound. They are the famous 3 Windrunner sisters. Duque was ready to beat up the 3 sisters, but Queen Sylvanas' staunchness was a little unexpected. Duke took a deep breath, and with the mentality of resurrection, he ignored the dagger on his neck that was moving up and down along with the pulse of his neck. He replied seriously, "Ask me, and I will answer truthfully. Maybe the answer will not be what you think, but I promise this will be the answer from my heart." Servanas gently bit her lips and shifted her gaze away for a moment. She then immediately stared back at Duke. "Do you love my eldest sister and third sister?" "Yes." Duque did not hesitate. "I heard from Lilith that they just can't come back to Azeroth for the time being. What will you do when they come back?" Women's words were often full of traps. At this time, Duque had no choice but to ignore these traps. "I will love them as always," Duque said resolutely. Almost instantly, Servanas' eyes that could speak were filled with tears. It was a pair of eyes that were about to cry. She bit down hard on her lips. She bit down so hard that blood started to seep out from her red lips. She took a few deep breaths, and her beautiful chest rose and fell. She said with a trembling voice, "Then do you like me? I mean the romantic kind." "I like it," Duque said decisively. Cervantes was overjoyed at first, but immediately retracted his ecstasy with a little fear. His face turned cold, and he raised his long eyebrows that were unique to high elves. "Then what am I? What do you like about me? Do you like the fact that I have a similar figure as Big Sister, or do you like the fact that I look like Third Sister? What are you doing? Like all three of us at the same time? Or do you like all high elves? Are you afraid that you will only be a substitute for the older or younger sisters?" Duque's words hit the nail on the head, immediately making Cervantes' entire body tremble. "I am not." Cervantes couldn't help but tilt her head away, not daring to look into Duque's burning eyes. Duque gently used 2 fingers on his left hand to clamp the dagger's edge, moving the dagger away. He gently used his left hand to wrap around that elastic little waist, while his right hand hooked Cervantes' chin, forcing her to look him in the eye again. Duque smiled. "That's Cervantes who cares about our sisterhood. That's Cervantes who shoots down enemies on the battlefield with her bow and arrow. That's Cervantes who swings her long legs on the eaves of my house without any misgivings. That's Cervantes who didn't hesitate to give up glory, splendor, wealth, and safety for the sake of her hometown. That's Cervantes who are willing to sacrifice themselves to save their own kind, giving up their freedom. I like every Cervantes so much." When Duque said this, Cervantes' entire body seemed to have been hit by the petrifying spell of love. Her whole body was stiff and unable to move. Only her heavy breathing and intense heartbeat told her that she was still alive. "There was once a sincere love placed in front of me, but I didn't dare to confirm it. I didn't dare to ask, and in the end, I missed it. There is nothing more painful than this in the world. In the past 10 years, I have been secretly regretting it. If God can give me another chance, I will say 3 words to that girl, 'I love you.' If I have to add a time limit to this love, I hope it is 10,000 years. The trick was not afraid of being old-fashioned, the key was that it was effective. The signature trick of Stephen Chow, which had been used by countless people before Duque's transmigration, still had the shocking lethality of a supreme love saint here. When Duque said this, Cervantes' emotional defense began to collapse. The incomparably resolute Queen Sylvie, who seemed to be ready to die at the slightest disagreement, had lost all her strength at this moment and collapsed in Duke's arms. Every inch of her skin that was exposed to the air was flushed with embarrassment and unbearable redness. The red lips that once spat out sonorous words were now only left with gentle gasps. She no longer dared to look at Duque. She tilted her head to one side and finally, almost struggling to ask, "You haven't answered me yet. What are you going to do with us sisters?" Humans can only have one legal wife, right? There are 3 of us. Also, don't you have a fiancé called Proudmoore? Gianna. That was also a problem. However, as a king of the harem mode, Duque was not afraid of any of this at all. Duque replied domineeringly, "At most, I will marry all of you sisters. Laws are made by humans. It just so happens that because of the years of war, human males have suffered heavy casualties. I will go back and change the alliance's laws to allow polygamy. As for Gianna, I hate political marriages that have no emotional foundation. No one can force me to marry a woman that I don't love." Wow. Nothing more than an abuse of power. This feels so good. Really? Cervantes asked tactfully. Duque did not notice that Queen Sylvanas' eyes suddenly flashed a trace of slyness. Of course. Duke slammed the table and replied in an imposing manner. At this moment, there was a very abrupt knock on the door. It was the voice of the goddamn bastard maid Vanessa. "Master Marcus, Miss Gianna Proudmoore has come to visit. Because Miss Proudmoore is your official fiancée, I took her directly to the door. Would you like to see her?" Already at the door, still not see her? Damn it. Looking at Queen Sylvanas, who was smiling like a flower in his arms, Duque's heart at this moment was filled with 10 billion curses. Damn it. You joined forces to trick me. Chapter 827. Duque was too careless. He was really too careless. As the saying goes, lust is like a knife above your head. In fact, the system elf did not use a mark to tell him that Jaina was approaching. At that moment, with a beauty in his arms, who the hell cared about the censor's green data? Queen Sylvanas was also secretly playing tricks. She definitely knew that Jaina had been Duque's rumored fiancée for 10 years. Jaina's footsteps could not be hidden from her. Even though she had just lost her mind, her senses were still many times more sensitive than Duque's when she was so close. She clearly wanted Duque to say it himself. Looking at her blinking her watery and sly eyes, it was clear that she was using her eyes to say, "You said it yourself, I didn't force you." But her face was full of a cunning smile. Duque really wanted to pull open Queen Sylvanas' pants to see if there was a devil's tail behind her, but... She must be a succubus spy sent by the Burning Legion. That's right. That's right. Duque could only grit his teeth in anger. Damn it. He had transmigrated to this world for so long that he almost forgot that Queen Sylvanas was quite two-faced in the original history. She tried to persuade Sasha to give up her life and become a forgotten one with her or something. Duque was speechless. And that damned maid Vanessa, needless to say, she, who had been with Kalia for 10 years, was at least not on Jaina's side. I'll deal with her later. But the most important thing now was to deal with Queen Sylvanas. Trying to trick me before even getting started? No way. This kind of evil must be resolutely dealt with. Duque looked like he had no choice but to give up. He hugged Queen Sylvanas' waist tightly, pinched her chin with his right hand, and made a gesture of forcing a kiss. If it was under normal circumstances, Sylvanas would have definitely rejected it. But outside the door was Jaina, the woman who had been showing off as Duque's fiancée for 10 years when her eldest sister and third sister were not around. Now that Duque had made a promise, she was very willing to give Duque some benefits and strike a blow to her rival in love. So Queen Sylvie put her arms around Duque's neck passionately, stretched her snow-white neck, closed her charming eyes, and offered a hot kiss. She made up her mind that when she kissed him later, she would definitely make the sound of water splashing and piss off the person outside the door. Who knew, he didn't receive an intense and passionate kiss. Instead, he felt a sharp pain in his nose. Woo woo woo. The tip of the nose was the most sensitive part of an elf. Queen Sylvie burst into tears when the tip of her nose was bitten. She hurriedly opened her eyes and saw Duque's vengeful gaze. Duque loosened his bite and pressed his lips against hers. This time, he fulfilled her wish from 3 seconds ago. It was a pity that the taste had changed. Queen Sylvie had already made up her mind to bite back at Duque if he dared to stick his tongue out. Duque actually guessed what she was thinking. He held her chin tightly with both hands. If he didn't open his mouth, how could he bite? It had become the purest kiss. What the hell was this? This time, it was Queen Sylvie's turn to grit her teeth. After a while, they separated. Duque smirked. This is a small return to you for tricking me. You. Queen Sylvie was angry. None of the Windrunner sisters were stupid. Of course, she understood that Duque wanted to establish dominance. Of course, she could fight, but after knowing him for so long, she knew very well that Duque would not be swayed by any constraints imposed on him. Look, the person outside the door was a living example. Back then, King Daelin and King Lang joined forces to hope that Duque would marry Jaina, but he resisted and refused. Duque was a man who could be persuaded but not cowed by force. Glancing at the silent door, Sylvanas threw Duque a resentful look, and then said softly, "I won't make things difficult for you." After saying that, she gave him a light kiss. Then, wearing high heels and an evening gown, Queen Sylvie nimbly jumped out of the window and disappeared into the night. Duque touched his lips, still feeling a little incredulous. He had thought that Queen Sylvie would take the opportunity to flip out. Coming back to his senses, Duque said loudly, "Come in, Jaina." The door opened, and Duque saw Jaina with her lips slightly pursed. Although she was still wearing her battle mage outfit, it was obvious that she had also put in a lot of effort. A light foundation, lightly drawn eyebrows, and just the right shade of lipstick. Because she was not wearing a cloak, her delicate shoulders, delicate collarbones, and fair waist were exposed. It was very tempting. Unfortunately, it seemed that all her efforts were in vain. Seeing that there was only Duque in the room, Jaina really heaved a sigh of relief. At least she didn't have to face this embarrassment. If Sylvanas was here to show off, she really didn't know what expression and attitude she should use to face her. The scene just now was equally awkward. She was like a block of wood at the door, not knowing whether to leave or stay. Her appearance was still dignified, and her temperament was still noble, but there was sadness in her eyes that couldn't be concealed. There had never been sparks of love between her and Duque, but they had been mentioned in the same breath since they were young. It wasn't just a political marriage. Ever since Jaina could understand, she knew what kind of fate she would have as a princess. To be honest, the long years of education in the palace had made her accept her fate early on. She used to be close to Arthes, but it was only a small adjustment under the premise that her fate didn't change. Unfortunately, fate seemed to be playing a joke on her. Arthes, whom she had favored back then, had fallen from a holy knight to a death knight, killed his father, and ended his own kingdom. Kale, that's, who had also been considered, had chosen the wrong side and was exiled by his own people. He was about to be sent to the dark portal to guard the borders of the world. Even Garen Trollbane, who she didn't want to marry the most and had a bad reputation, and was one of the candidates for her husband, had now died and become an undead without a backbone. After going around in circles a few times, Jaina, who was forced by her father and the entire upper echelons of cultivation to marry, was left with only one choice, Duque. Fine. After all, Duque was a Grand Duke who was the focus of attention, a great hero and the commander of the alliance. Marrying Duque was at least not a loss on the surface. She gained face, but suffered a loss. Since ancient times, most of the children of the royal family had been like this. Now that Duque had returned, he actually declared that no one could force him to marry someone he didn't love. Speaking of which, that was indeed the case. Whether it was Stormwind or cultivation, they couldn't do anything to a genius like Duque, who was above the country. Now it was even more exaggerated. Whether it was Duque as a Breaking Dawn Archmage or the commander of the Alliance, either of these two identities couldn't do anything to him. Not to mention that there seemed to be a queen and an elf who was about to become a queen trying to steal her husband. Then what about her, who had been holding the title of Marquis Fiancé for 10 years? Without any words, 2 lines of clear tears flowed down Jaina's beautiful face. Chapter 828. Duque had imagined many scenarios, such as Jaina throwing a tantrum at him, Jaina trying to reason with him, Jaina bringing Daylin over to suppress him. However, Duque had never thought that Jaina would use the most primitive and feminine reaction to move his heart. Jaina's reputation of selling out her father had left a deep impression on him. He had avoided her as much as possible, feared her like a snake or a scorpion, and always kept his guard up against her. However, the prejudiced Duque had forgotten an important principle time and time again. While a person's nature was important, experiences were the core factors that shaped a person's personality. For example, children who had experienced domestic violence or grew up in a single-parent family would easily distrust their family. Another example would be children who had failed in everything they did since they were young. They would lack confidence when they grew up, and would never have the ability to lead. Jaina's life path was very different from history. Although she was still not favored by her father Daylin in this life, and Crown Prince Thenred already had a son, she would never be able to inherit the throne of cultivation. However, she did not have to act like a social butterfly, flirting with idiots and rich men. All she wanted was a future. Lucia had personally confirmed that Jaina had been very dutiful in the past 10 years. She did not even have a male dog by her side, much less a lover. The only things that kept her company were magic and business. She's still a virgin, Lucia had said temptingly at that time. Duque smiled bitterly. In this era where people had to get married in their teens, Jaina had undoubtedly become an old lady in the eyes of the world because she carried the title of his fiancée. Before Duque's transmigration, it was not uncommon for women to get married in their 30s. After all, there were many single men. In the circle of humans in Azeroth, she was at the level of an old hag. Even though Duque knew that Jaina's ambition was not here, gossip was a fearful thing. Duque suddenly felt guilty when he thought of this, and looked at the 2 streaks of tears on Jaina's face under the gentle light of the magic lamp. "I'm sorry, I didn't notice how you felt. I was being inconsiderate. I wanted to keep my private life separate." Jaina lowered her head weakly and looked at her toes. Then, she quickly raised her head again. Duque couldn't read her complicated eyes at all. Gianna clenched her fists tightly, her whole body tensing up. In the next moment, an almost hysterical roar erupted from that sexy little mouth. "I've been working hard to fall in love with you, Duque. But I've been your fiancé for more than 10 years in vain. I've always been thinking about how to change myself so that I can be more pleasing to you. But your heart has always been rejecting me. You haven't even given me a chance to start. You've already ruthlessly cut off all possibilities." With tears in her eyes, Jaina moved her trembling body and stepped forward with her left foot. "After I found out about you and Miss Aurelia and Miss Sasha, my court tutor told me that as long as the title of your wife belongs to me, I must pretend not to see anything. This is the rule of the nobles. Not to mention other kings, even my father did it." Then the right foot. "Yes. I wasn't an adult then, but from that day onwards, I told myself that I had to endure it. I made myself a good student. Because that was the only time you wouldn't be wary of me." Then the third step. Jaina was less than a meter away from Duque. She could clearly see every curve of shock on Duque's face. "Since I was a young girl until I became an adult, I've always been thinking about how to win your heart. Oh God of the sea, I was very depressed for a long time. Because my tutor and I started to think that you only liked high elves and not human women." The fourth step. The distance between the two was less than half a meter. 10 years. I waited for you for a full 10 years. A woman's golden and most beautiful moment was spent waiting. In order to avoid the torment in my heart, I didn't dare to read any romance novels. He even specialized in ice element magic. I spent almost all of these 10 years in the library and in the laboratory. The fifth step. At this point, the two could almost smell the hot breath coming out of each other's nostrils. But you came back. Suddenly, just when the whole continent needed you the most, the great hero Duke Marcus came back. But when you came back, you accepted Alicia Berev. That expression of a woman in love, no matter how you pretended that nothing happened, you couldn't even fool the guards. Only then did I know, oh, so you like human women too. Duque's Adam's apple moved a little. At this time, the tip of Jaina's nose was almost touching the tip of Duque's nose. It was a pair of infinitely sad blue eyes. First it was Countess Alicia, then Queen Kalia, and now Queen Sylvanas. How can I continue to pretend that nothing has happened? I can't take it anymore. Please tell me, what did I do to make you so disgusted and reject me? Even if I lose. Even if you cancel my fiancé status. Can you give me a reason to let me know why I lost? Phew, Duque let out a long breath and sorted out his thoughts. From the perspective of the engagement, even though this was a bad debt, even though he had never acknowledged this marriage, because of the accident of Karazhan's explosion, he had indeed dragged Jaina down. And the women he had offended were getting more and more powerful. In the past, he could still pretend that she was his secret lover and not see it. But then, the queen came out one after another as if she did not need money. If the engagement was broken, Jaina, who had no marriage partner, would not have to worry about being captured by Daylin and locked up in the palace for the rest of her life. But now that the Daligen had been destroyed, it was understandable that Jaina would feel great pressure and indecisiveness. Jaina, no matter what, this is a bad debt. From the perspective of a noble, this is already unsolvable. But I just want to ask you, do you think that by marrying me and having a child to be my heir, you can fulfill your dream with peace of mind? Dream. Jaina's body trembled, and then she froze. Duque continued to patiently guide Jaina. According to the tradition of the royal family, if you marry a powerful person you don't like and simply become a tool to carry on the family line, without doing anything for the rest of your life, would you be willing? Would you be willing? There was almost no need to ask further. Jaina had already given the answer. No. Never. Absolutely not. How could I be willing? Chapter 829. As the saying went, beauties were picturesque. In the eyes of an artist, a beauty's every frown, smile, cry, or throw a tantrum could all be included in a painting. There were many famous beauties in the world of Azeroth. In terms of looks, blonde hair and blue eyes, which were very common here, did not add much to Jaina's score. In terms of figure, there were many women who were more voluptuous than Jaina. In the Alliance, no one was more famous or controversial than Jaina. Why? Perhaps everyone often criticized Jaina's talent as a social butterfly. Or perhaps she sold her father and pretended to cry. However, it could not be forgotten that she was the one who promoted the first alliance between the Horde and the Alliance and participated in the Battle of Mount Hyjal. In that battle, the heroes of Azeroth faced Archimonde, the boss of the Burning Legion. He was a terrifying existence that surpassed a single alliance, Horde, and the self-enclosed Night Elves at that time. To be able to make a cross-faction alliance and personally go to the battlefield in front of a great enemy, it had to be said that Jaina's courage and boldness at that time were absolutely top-notch. Unfortunately, no one was perfect. Later in history, Jaina turned evil and did stupid things. That was another matter. Admittedly, Duque could marry her and use the righteous title of a legal husband to suppress Jaina and have sex with her. Then, they would have sex every day and get pregnant. Then, they would have to carry 2 or 4 babies every 3 years. When she joined the reincarnation guerrilla force and had babies everywhere, Duque did not believe that she would not become useless. However, history had changed greatly. Duque believed that after giving Jaina a strong dose of medicine back then, Jaina would no longer be so close to the orcs. Similarly, from the age of 13 to adulthood, the environment in which she grew up had been greatly purified. Now that Duque controlled the lifeline of the Alliance, Jaina should be controllable. So, it would be a waste to cripple Jaina. Looking at Jaina, who pursed her lips slightly and had a stubborn and wise glint in her eyes, Duque knew that he had finally found a balance on how to deal with Jaina. Duque sighed softly. As a commander, my vision is destined to be different from that of ordinary people. Give the Griffins a sky, give the generals a battlefield, and give the veterans a home to return to. I've always been an advocate of using things according to the person. Jaina, from the first day I met you, I knew that it would be a waste to lock someone as smart and wise as you up in the backyard. That would be a waste of Tiras, a waste of the entire alliance. When Duque said this, Jaina's face was still filled with shock. This kind of change was too unexpected, and it suddenly grasped her Achilles heel and scratched the most itchy part of her heart. Her maiden heart started to beat wildly against her will. Moreover, not everyone is willing to go to the southern continent with the Alliance. You mean? Jaina's heart beat faster. She seemed to have grasped what Duque wanted to say. Not only the people from Torrential Castle, but also the people from Gilnis. Because their country once left the Alliance, even though I have already ordered them to treat the refugees equally. In fact, the refugees from these 2 countries are still severely discriminated against and even abused. At this point, Duque also sighed. He had left so many backup plans to prevent Jaina from courting death and inciting these people to travel across the ocean with her. Who knew that at this point, there were many things that could not be solved with a single order from him? There were policies from above, and countermeasures from below. If the people above said no, the people below would still pay lip service. There were even soldiers from Stormwind who bullied the refugees from these two countries. Duque did not have so much energy to care about such details. In the end, many of the people who escaped from these two countries really became refugees among refugees. If left alone, they would be abused to death sooner or later. This was a chaotic world. It was normal for thousands of refugees to die. Jaina, I hope to establish a bridgehead for the Alliance in the Kalandor continent. On one side, it is to monitor the Horde, and on the other side, it is to deal with the possible invasion of the Calamity Army. I want to give this task to you. Can you do it? Chapter 830. In the past 10 years, Jaina was not someone who had been through the trials and tribulations. After all, she had not experienced the battle of the Dark Portal, so she could not be considered to be independent. At best, she was only involved in some small side business. In history, she had participated in the investigation of the plague with Arthas before the outbreak of the cataclysm. She had also experienced the massacre in Stratholme. She was completely mature. Although she had the title of a Dalajan counselor given to her by Duque, she was still a rookie who had not been through the baptism of war. It was impossible to say that she was not nervous. However, building a bridgehead for the Alliance across the continent was something that even the elite pioneers might not be able to do well. She did not believe that she was being biased. She did have a plan for Theramore, but it was based on the premise that Mediva's prophecy came true and the situation of the entire Rotterdam collapsed. Mediva's prophecy was now half correct. The scourge was strong, but with Duque's efforts, the situation was not beyond redemption. Now, the Alliance and the scourge were evenly matched. When the situation collapsed, no one would say anything about how she brought the refugees away. At the very least, she saved a large group of people, didn't she? If the situation did not collapse, she would take a large number of refugees away from the Eastern Kingdom without permission when the Alliance organized a large number of refugees to go south. This was undoubtedly a betrayal to the Alliance. Not to mention, her father, Dai Lin, would not let her go. If Duque sent her there as the Alliance commander, it would be a completely different matter. Not only was it legitimate, but it also meant that she would have strong support. Theramore was definitely a place that was far away from the Emperor. If she managed it well, she would be a queen in the truest sense. She would be able to jump out of Kurtira's restraints. If she was more ruthless, even Duque would not be able to control her after she gained a firm foothold. This prospect made her, who had long been restless, unable to suppress the excitement in her heart. How about it? Jaina, are you willing to do this job? Jaina was stunned by Duque's question for a full 3 seconds before she came back to her senses. She replied almost hurriedly, yes. Yes, of course I'm willing. The last word was practically roared out. Duque smiled. In his heart, he couldn't stop laughing. Theramore was a giant pit. When the relationship between the Alliance and the Horde was good, Theramore could make do with it. If their relationship wasn't good, who had ever seen a lion living next to a tiger's den? Now, the Night Elves were a group of self-enclosed xenophobes who were still muttering, "Long live the forest." Someone had to show the existence of the human race. Since he was going to send someone over anyway, he might as well send Jaina, the experienced technician. Anyway, with the trauma of almost being killed by the orcs at a young age, Duque was really not afraid of her sincere cooperation with Sal. Moreover, since Duque dared to bring it up, he must have a backup plan. At this moment, if Jaina was a man, then the scene before him would be a typical scene of a king and his minister enjoying each other's company, and a gentleman dying for his bosom friend. If Duque's body trembled, Jaina would have kowtowed to him. Well, the above content is a little classical. But Jaina was so happy that she almost fainted. You really support me to prove myself? Aren't you afraid that I'll screw it up? I haven't proven myself in any field. I only know a bit of magic. Jaina covered her heaving chest. Well, it was quite pleasing to the eye. The true gentleman Duque opened the system elf's video recording while staring into Jaina's eyes. Duque smiled faintly. Isn't this good for you, for me, for the refugees, and for the alliance? You want to start a career. I don't want a political marriage that I don't like. The refugees need a sanctuary. The alliance needs a pioneer to monitor the horde. Since it's good for everyone, I can't think of any reason to refuse. What Duque said made sense. As smart as Jaina was, she actually couldn't find any flaws. But my father, I'll take care of His Majesty Daylin, Duque agreed immediately. A political marriage was just a part of a political exchange. As long as the bargaining chips were sufficient, it wouldn't be a big problem. Besides, things were different now. As long as Duque refused to acknowledge the engagement, Daylin couldn't ignore the pressure from the Rotterdam and Kuel Salis, and force Duque to marry Jaina. What about manpower and resources? You won't be left out. I, Duque, have always been open and aboveboard in the alliance. When have you ever seen me resort to underhanded tricks? The success of the development depends on your strength, decisiveness, and luck. It definitely has nothing to do with logistics. At this moment, Duque secretly activated the moral integrity that Alonso's fail had inherited. Ah! The great sage Du has shown himself. Pft, pft, pft. In any case, this time, Jaina was really touched to the point that she almost burst into tears. She pursed her red lips and squirmed for a while. Finally, she revealed a genuine smile that came from the bottom of her heart since she became an adult. It was night time, but it felt like dawn. It was midsummer, but it felt like early spring. An extremely beautiful woman who had abandoned her scheming, and pretense, and revealed a smile that was so beautiful that it made Duque feel as if he would suffocate due to excessive excitement at any time. Her bright eyes smiled, and her smile could topple a city. At this moment, her beauty would last forever. Thank you, Duque. Duque lowered his head, feeling a little embarrassed. You're welcome. If this is anything, just take it as an opportunity that you've exchanged for with the golden name of Madame Marcus. Yes, Duque's current status in the alliance was so important that any other noble girl would want to be his wife even if she had to live half her life. Jaina was different. She had truly inherited the will and legacy of the sea hero, Daylin Proudmoore. From the beginning, she was not the kind of woman who was willing to be a mistress at home. The heroic bloodline that flowed in her drove her to take risks and explore the world. Give the canary a birdcage. Give the seagull an ocean. Give the dragon a piece of the sky. This was Duque's way, and the best way. Feeling Duque's extraordinary courage, at this moment, Jaina's heart, which she thought had long been dead, showed signs of loosening. Unknowingly, a trace of red flew to her cheeks. Jaina couldn't help but tease. It seems that giving up the status of your wife is a big loss for me. Duque smiled. Oh, is that so? Whether it's a loss or a gain, only one's feelings are the most real. I never care about the judgment of others. It's just that if I fail, what should I do? Father will definitely not want me, and my second brother will not welcome me back to Kultiras. At that time, even my followers won't believe me. Won't I be miserable? Chapter 831. At this moment, Duque smiled. If it was Cervantes, who was still a high elf, he would definitely stick to his heart and move forward. But Jaina was too smart and good at judging the situation. Before calculating victory, she would first calculate defeat. That was how people like her were described. Her undying ambition drove her to be restless. On the other hand, she was also afraid of failure. In a sense, this also meant that she could not be the real boss. Who had ever seen a boss who was overcautious and could still achieve great things? According to the laws of horror anime or television series before Duque traveled to this world, people like her would not live to see the second episode. Duque smiled. At this time, what Jaina needed was a little encouragement. Duque knew this, but he was angry and wanted to tease Jaina. The Dalian will definitely be rebuilt. In the future, Kirin Tor will be very important. Jaina did not show any weakness. She tilted her head a little slyly and smiled. I am already a Kirin Tor. Duque knew that Jaina would not be moved by what she already had, but he played dumb. Then there is no problem. He was up to no good. Jaina was not stupid. Suddenly, Jaina opened her arms and hugged him. Her movements were very slow. So slow that even if Duque was an ordinary person, he could have dodged 100 times. But her eyes were telling Duque, if you don't let me hug you, I will regret it. Duque gritted his teeth and let Jaina do as she pleased. It would be a lie to say that he was not excited when a beauty hugged him. Duque could clearly feel the roundness and softness of the two magic peaks. It was different from the Windrunner sisters. This was another kind of extreme. The elasticity of a female ranger that had been trained for a long time was not something an ordinary woman could have. On the contrary, Jaina's soft, shape-shifting touch was something that even the Windrunner sisters could not learn. Even through the clothes, he could feel the smoothness. This was definitely another kind of depravity. Jaina proud more. Are you sure you're not a succubus spy sent by the Burning Legion? At this time, Jaina suddenly breathed into Duque's ear and said in a soft, sweet voice, I have a treasure that I have kept for 27 years. I have never let anyone touch it. No matter what happens, from the past, to the present, to the future, this treasure of mine will only be left for you. However, this treasure has a shelf life. I'm afraid that after 30 years, it will deteriorate and people will look down on it. So, can I trouble you to come and take it when you're in a good mood or have time within these 2 years? Holy shit. There was actually such a mysterious treasure in this world. Moreover, it's a treasure that only belongs to me? Damn, no way. If I enter a treasure mountain and return empty-handed, then I am not Duque. My honest and reliable husband. A gentleman of honor, Dumoke. How could he not happily accept such a treasure? Duque knew what Jaina was thinking. If she couldn't be his wife, then she could be his lover, right? With Duque as her backing, she would be much more at ease. This wasn't Jaina playing Duque with an empty promise. As long as Duque was willing, the treasure would immediately be in his hands. And it was the kind of magical treasure that no one could take away once it was taken. Thinking about it, Duque was speechless. Unfortunately, the next moment, Duque came to his senses. He had just been tricked by Queen Sylvanas a few minutes ago, so he deliberately changed the system elf's detection mode. Then, at this moment, the system elf's red text prompt was, detected a female human and a high elf near you, in listening mode. F***CK. Listen to hell. If Vanessa, who was eavesdropping outside the door, reported it to Kalia, and then Queen Sylvanas would fly into a rage, and it would directly turn into a civil war in the Alliance. All of a sudden, all of Duque's primitive impulses were gone. He didn't know where to put his arm, but he finally hugged Jaina in a very proper posture. I'm not such a heartless person. If someone treats me with sincerity, I will return the favor with sincerity. The Marcus family's territory is quite large. Not to mention a Radiant Moon Wizard Tower, even a Breaking Dawn Wizard Tower wouldn't be a problem. Jaina was naturally willing to take away Jaina's treasure now. Firstly, it wasn't the right time, and secondly, that would put Duque at a disadvantage. Unknowingly, the atmosphere had instead turned into a faint sense of warmth. In a sense, it was also beyond Duque and Jaina's expectations. No one had thought that the atmosphere would become so subtle. Was this considered above friends, but not yet lovers? Jaina left with a satisfied expression. Duque felt bitter. Originally, he still had the fire that Jaina had stirred up. Who knew that not long after Jaina left, a female voice that was obviously jealous came in the wind. Oh, little brother Duque, I also have a magical treasure here. However, unlike the treasures of humans, the treasures of us high elves have a long shelf life. I don't mind keeping it for 1,000 or 800 years. You can go look for those treasures that have a short shelf life. Don't worry about me." After saying that, the owner of the voice disappeared without giving Duque a chance to refute. Duque almost choked to death. The bitter Duque scratched his head and struck while the iron was hot to find Delin. At first, the angry roars of King Delin could be heard from Delin's private cabin, but it quickly became silent. At dawn, an announcement jointly issued by Duque and King Delin spread to the upper echelons of the alliance. It probably meant that the marriage between Duque and Jaina was not approved by Duque himself. Such a marriage alliance was no longer suitable, and both parties agreed to cancel the marriage amicably. Duque compensated Kurtiras with a 36-page gift. If it was during peacetime, this would definitely be an astronomical amount of compensation. However, during the duration of the Battle of Calamity known as the Third Battle of the Dark Portal, many things were actually useless. Money and luxuries were not as practical as a team of fully armed elite soldiers or a cart of uncontaminated food. As for the news of Princess Jaina Proudmoore forming an expeditionary force and opening a new safe harbor on the Kalandor continent on the other side of the Endless Ocean, it did not cause much of a reaction among the upper echelons of the alliance. Instead, as Duque expected, it caused an enthusiastic response among the refugees of Gilness and Stromgard. At this time, Duque immediately had a headache because of the aftermath of the annulment of the marriage. Duque had become a single dog, in theory. However, what made Duque most unbearable was that bastard Mograine. He did not hesitate to let Abendis use the teleportation portal to rush back to Silvery Moon City to find out what was going on. To put it nicely, he was asking about how to purify the Eastern Plague Lands and how to deal with the possible attack of the Scourge army. In fact, he was here to promote his own queen. Duque had a headache. Fortunately, something saved Duque. Chapter 832. The Sunwell could not hold on any longer. At first, the High Elves tried to ask Riataline, Jaina Goldsword, and other external help to see if they could change the internal circulation flow of the Sunwell, or activate the self-purification system of the Sunwell to purify the plague. After all, in their imagination, the water of the Sunwell, which represented high temperature and holy purification, would definitely be able to purify the plague associated with the resurrection of a mere Great Lich. Unfortunately, the situation was far beyond their imagination. The polluted area in the Sunwell was expanding. They could not even divide it, let alone purify it. With the betrayal of the Sun King and the almost complete annihilation of the high-level mages, the power of the High Elves alone was not enough. No matter how much they regarded the Sunwell as a national treasure that outsiders could not touch, they had to bend their knees and ask for help from the only Breaking Dawn mage in the alliance, Duque. Yes, Duque had a good relationship with the Windrunner sisters. Duque might become the husband of the possible Queen of Kuel Salis. The High Elves comforted themselves. The one who came was Rothamar Theron. With the utmost humility, she asked for Duque's help. That humble look made Abendis, who was next to Duque, almost suspect that Rothamar was a human farmer who had never seen a high noble before. "Let's go." Duque did not comment. He was not the scapegoat, so he naturally did not have to take the blame. If his memory was right, he should be able to use this incident to reap the greatest benefits. The tall and majestic Sunwell stood on the highest peak of the Sunwell Highland. Because of the resurrection of Kel Thuzad, the walls of the Sunwell were like cliffs. Standing on the edge of the well, one could overlook the entire Isle of Quel Danas. 6,800 years ago, when the High Elves exiled to the east, under the leadership of Dasrima Sunstrider, built this huge well with the water from the Well of Eternity, they used magic to combine the stone and the trees into one. Even from the perspective of modern people who had flourished with magic, they still felt that this was simply a miracle. Without experiencing it personally, it was impossible to feel that kind of shock. Even Duque, a transmigrator who had seen the capital's big underpants, the bird's nest, the Sydney banana leaf, and other magical modern buildings, could not help but be moved. The walls of the well were made of a single piece of rectangular volcanic rock weighing at least 1,000 tons. After being polished and cut, they were perfectly inlaid into one piece. Just this alone was enough to make any crane company on Earth before his transmigration feel ashamed and close down. Huge vine-type evergreen plants tightly wrapped around the walls of the well, and hundreds of huge ancient trees mysteriously intertwined. At the top of the Well of the Sun was a group of magnificent buildings reinforced by rocks. The spire of the High Elves' luxurious tower could be seen everywhere. From the floor to the walls to the ceiling, beautiful and complicated patterns filled Duque's vision. It was not hard to imagine how many elves were touched when the palaces were first built on top of the Well of the Sun. Unfortunately, such a Sunwell highland was now daunting. The Calamity Army had destroyed everything. There was clearly a warm sun in the sky, but the dilapidated and terrifying scene was easily reminiscent of a stormy night. Even though the remaining High Elves had moved away all the corpses of the elves who had died in battle and the Undying, and even used more puppets to forcefully drag away the broken arcane puppets, the mysterious aura of decay shrouded the entire Well of the Sun. That blackish-green aura made everyone who was staring at it quickly avert their eyes. Every elf that came in and out wore at least a mask. The closer the elves were to the Well of the Sun, the more tightly they wrapped themselves, and even wore a mask filter made by the Marcus family on their faces. 7 layers of gauze and activated charcoal made Duque brand filter. You deserve it. If it were not for the sacred Well of the Sun, these long-ears would probably not be willing to wear such ugly gas masks even if they died. Duque wanted to snicker, but he managed to hold it in. Under Lord Themar's lead, Duque finally passed through the palace that was full of dilapidated tiles and came to the side of the Well of the Sun. It was a huge pool of bubbling black water. It looked a little like hogwash for pigs, and a little like ink mixed with vegetable juice and leftover soup. It emitted a disgusting smell and evil aura. Lord Themar wanted to hand a filter mask to Duque, but stopped halfway and smiled bitterly. How embarrassing. The gas mask was invented by Duque. Duque would not know whether to use it or not. Moreover, even though there was a pungent wind around them, the blackish-green aura in the air was clearly discernible to the naked eye. When it blew in front of Duque, it was dispelled by the faint golden light emitted from Duque's body. This was a perfect example of being immune to all poisons. Please follow me. Lord Themar bent even lower without realizing it. Following Lord Themar and the new team of Well of the Sun Guardians, Duque did not walk towards the path that led to a certain boss in his memory, but to the other side. A road made of stone dams led straight to the center of the Well of the Sun. He did not need to look around to feel that there was no longer a trace of peace in the well. There was still a hint of green at the edge of the well, but it was pure black here. Unlike usual, the lake water was even more turbulent than at the edge of the well. Near the center of the well, there were huge waves that even a battleship might not be able to withstand. The roaring black waves slammed hard against the small island in the center of the well, which was wrapped in volcanic rock that was full of magic runes. No, it was no longer just well water. Near the center of the well, there was lightning. The surging waves flashed gold, crimson, and finally all faded to black. Thunder rumbled as if 1,000 dragons were galloping from the side of the well. On the center of the well island, Duque finally saw Cervanus, as well as Lilith, Hageron, Gina Jinjian, Riataline, and the other remaining high-level elves. Every elf had a sorrowful expression on their faces, and there were still traces of tears at the corner of Cervanus' eyes. Seeing Duque come over, Cervanus squeezed out a bitter smile that did not have much hope. Duque, I really want to say that I'm counting on you for the Well of the Sun, but I can't bring myself to say such irresponsible words. If I had let you come from the start, the situation might have been better. At this point, a few high-level elven mages lowered their heads. With the divine artifact of the Well of the Sun, the high elves still had a very deep foundation. Now, there were actually 3 radiant moon mages standing here. The other 2 were like Gina Jinjian, royal mages who were worshipped by various countries. One was from Lordaeron, and the other was previously a magic consultant in Torrential Fortress. Chapter 833. Duque waved his hand. Don't blame them. They're just trying to save the Sun Well. What if I told you that my judgment from the moment the Sun Well was polluted was that it had to be blown up? Would you accept it? The faces of all the high elves turned as pale as paper. Right. It was a cruel but correct judgment. Even though they knew that what Duke said was very likely correct, the glory and inheritance of their nation still made them subconsciously ignore this incomparably correct decision. Until the situation got out of hand. Servanas asked Lord Themar to hand over a report written in Elvish. She knew that Duque could understand it. She nodded as Duque flipped through it. Gina Goldsword explained in a heavy voice, the Sun Well isn't just the well itself. The veins of the Sun Well cover most of the kingdom. They go straight through Silvermoon and split into 3 branches that cover the entire Long Song forest. So, if the pollution isn't cleaned up, the most direct result is that the plague will continue to spread throughout the kingdom. We estimate that in another month, the entire kingdom will be barren. Duke glanced at the water in the well. The system elf's high-speed calculations caused countless numbers of data to pour down from the top of his left retina like a stream of light. Duque shook his head. You didn't calculate the spread of the pollution. When the core is completely polluted, the spread of the pollution will be more than 1,000 times faster than it is now. You only have 3 days left. 69 hours, to be exact. Hiss. All the elves gasped. If it weren't for the holy light shield that Riadaline and the other clerics had put up, all the elves would probably have inhaled a few breaths of the poisonous gas. Then, there was a burst of sobbing. Servanas pursed his lips. What's the worst and best outcome? The worst outcome is that my control fails, and the entire Isle of Quell, Donnas and the branches of the magic power will explode into the sky. The pollution will spread, and everything within 1,000 miles will become a dead land. Unless a large number of druids and clerics work together, ordinary people won't be able to live here for the next 300 years. As soon as Duque finished, everyone was silent. Servanas didn't know when, but his fingernails had already sunk deep into his palm. He suddenly raised his head. What's the best? Duque raised his first finger. If my control is successful, I will drive the pollution to a certain place and detonate it. This area will become a land of death, and it must be sealed for 1,000 years. No one is allowed to enter or leave. Otherwise, if it is leaked, all humans and animals within a radius of several hundred kilometers will die. Then the second finger. Sacrifice is not without cost. In that case, the Isle of Quell, Donnas and the Long Song forest were likely to be preserved intact. At the very least, Quell Salis is not a land of death. Please give me some time alone with Duque. Sylvanas nodded to the other elves, then walked in front and led Duque into a side hall of the palace. The side hall wasn't big, only about 20 square meters. It had the typical luxurious decorations of the high elves. Just as the door closed, Duque was suddenly hugged by Sylvanas. Sorry, I didn't want to put all the pressure on your shoulders. But I can't think of any other choice. He used to think that Sylvanas was a fighter who fought against fate and never gave up. In history, when the natural disaster invaded, she swore to fight against Arthas until she was defeated and died. Then, when she saw a chance to fight back, she immediately led all her suffering compatriots to fight back against Arthas, even if they became undead. After realizing that she was already a dead person and could not return to the embrace of her compatriots, she led all the Forgotten Ones to establish her own force in this world. But when Duque looked at the trembling shoulders, felt the intense heartbeat coming from his chest, and sensed the wet tears coming from his shoulders, Duque fell silent. That's right. The remaining high elves longed for a wise leader. They also longed for a relatively intact home. On his way here, the word Duque heard the most was Nomorigan. Yes, one mistake, and Quell Salis would become another Nomorigan, a place of death that they could never return to. Gently hugging Sylvanas tightly, Duque comforted her. Don't worry, I have at least 80% confidence to protect 1/3 of the sun well. In fact, the system elf's judgment was even higher. Duque didn't dare to be too sure. Really? There was surprise and infinite hope in her misty eyes. She quickly wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes, and said, if even 1/10 of the Sunwell can be protected, then the new Sin Dorii kingdom will be stable. Internal affairs are not my forte. I will bring the most elite warriors and follow you to take revenge on the Calamity Army. Even if you have to go to the end of hell, I will accompany you. Duque suddenly laughed. You don't have to go to the end of hell. When Aurelia and Sasha come back, you 3 sisters will be willing to have a pillow fight with me on the bed. They were talking about serious matters and swearing, but Duque was so good at it. In the blink of an eye, the solemn atmosphere was ruined. Sylvanas was just about to yell at Duque, but she suddenly realized that she was not nervous anymore. She burst out laughing. Although your joke is very shameful, thank you. I really feel much better now. Wait, did you misunderstand? I really want all 3 sisters to come at me together. Hey, Queen Sylvanas, did you misunderstand something? What about my benefits? Aren't you afraid that I will go on strike without benefits? Looking at Duque's disappointed look, Queen Sylvanas pinched his waist hard. Brat. Let's get this done first. After saying that, she waved her hand, opened the door, and left. There was only one word left on Duque's face. The emergency evacuation order was issued. All the elves were mobilized to evacuate every survivor out of the range of the magical ley line, to the seaside, or outside the Long Song forest. The next night, it was a stormy night. No one knew what kind of dawn the next day would bring. Would it be the destruction of darkness? Or the rebirth of the elves? Around the highland of the Sunwell, the guards who had already left their wills or said goodbye to their families were wearing red armor with golden edges. They held double-headed crescent swords in their right hands and kite shields in their left hands. Together with rangers and battle mages, they formed small teams and looked around carefully. Not only did they monitor the island for trespassers, but they also paid special attention to the movements inside from time to time, especially the huge wellhead made of volcanic rocks. Because any one of them could sense that an unpredictable and mysterious power was being nurtured. On the central island of the Sunwell, Duque exhaled and looked at Queen Sylvanas who was guarding him. Let's begin. Chapter 834. Standing on Welland Island, one could see that Duque and Queen Sylvanas were already isolated from the outside world, even though they seemed to still be on the island. The space defense array that originated from the founder of the kingdom, Dethrima Sunstrider, had completely separated Welland Island from the outside world. When Arthas invaded the Well of the Sun, Dethrima's remnant soul had made the most heroic resistance for the survival of the High Elves. Unfortunately, he had failed. Arthas had directly torn apart such a rotten soul that was not even worth subduing. The rest of the things that had not been activated in time were all taken by Duque. Duque thought to himself, these things are the price I have to pay for preserving half of Kuel Salis. The system elf silently recorded the composition of the magic array and analyzed all the possibilities of the array's evolution. The radiant moon elven mages by the well all had their mouths wide open. At this moment, Duque was wearing a pearl robe inlaid with 108 arcane gems. The red robe was inlaid with golden edges of the sun pattern, intertwined with round high elven inscriptions, and hung to the ground. The center of the magic array pattern under his feet was engraved with many profound ancient elven words that non-elven elders could not understand. It seemed to be the finishing touch. Duque's raising of his hand and raising of his foot coincided with the ancient casting gestures of the High Elves. Many auxiliary gestures used for strengthening and amplification were lost even in Kuel Salis. Duque's movements were slow, and he looked quiet and focused. Yet, serious men always had a kind of magic that captivated people's hearts. Especially when Duque was wearing the robe that had been passed down from Dethrima and kept in the museum of the Silver Moon Council, his image overlapped with Dethrima's. More than one elf uttered the same words as Gina Goldsword. They murmured, "Why do I feel like I'm seeing His Majesty Dethrima?" Looking at Duque preparing to cast a spell, every high elf suddenly felt that it was not so uncomfortable to let a human like Duque preside over the Well of the Sun. It was no longer a desperate and painful compromise for the continuation of their race and kingdom, but a true inheritance. Wind rose. Clouds surged. Not just the wind and the clouds, but also magic power. Something was moving toward the Well of the Sun quickly. All the elves could not help but look at the red-robed figure by the sun well, the former Prince Kale. He should have left Kuel's Salis a long time ago, but due to the pollution of the sun well, Kale, was summoned back again. However, there was no resentment on the face of this pure-hearted prince, only the same worry as the other elves. If he had not submitted to his father, perhaps he would have inherited the throne and made the painful decision of destroying the Well of the Sun. Right now, he was just a spectator. "Your Highness, do you really not need our help?" Great Astromancer Solarian whispered into Kale's ear, "If you really don't need us, we might as well leave." From Solarian's point of view, she could either join in the operation to save the Well of the Sun in order to wash away the prince's shame and stain, or she could simply leave to protect herself. He would not be in an awkward position like he was now. Kale shook his head as if he was not answering the question. 13 years ago, at the end of the second gate of darkness. At that time, Duque was far from being this strong. He was already able to use Antonida's hand to control the powerful magic power of the Gate of Darkness, which was not inferior to the Well of the Sun, and successfully closed the Gate of Darkness. In terms of control, Duque is the best in the world. We have to trust him. This was not seeking progress, but also not seeking safety. In the hearts of several hardcore fans, this was the worst choice. However, this was the decision of the prince they were loyal to bet everything on Duque. Solarian lowered her head, took half a step back, and did not speak. In fact, Kale had deliberately misspoken. He could deceive the melee professionals under him, but he definitely couldn't deceive the Astromancers. Perhaps the magic power of the Gate of Darkness and the Well of the Sun was on the same level, but in fact, there was a huge difference between the two. The Gate of Darkness itself did not produce magic power. On the contrary, it was a huge magic tool that simply consumed magic power. The magic power used by Ghoul Dan to open the Gate of Darkness came mainly from the soul energy obtained from killing a large number of Draenei, as well as the extraction of the life energy of the entire planet Draenor. The magic power of the Gate of Darkness was huge, but its magic power would not increase by itself. Moreover, what maintained the Gate of Darkness in the later stages was the extraction of life energy from the Swamp of Sorrow, which was now the Cursed Land. The Well of Sun was different. The Well of Sun was like a nuclear power plant that was constantly undergoing nuclear fission. The current pollution was the biggest interference to its energy production process. In the ancient war 10,000 years ago, because a series of magic reactions interfered with the energy of the water of the first Well of Eternity, there was a big explosion, which led to what later generations called the Cataclysm. The entire Kalandor continent was split into several pieces, mainly the Kalandor continent in the west, the Eastern Kingdom in the east, Northrend in the north, and Pandaria in the south. The original location of the well collapsed into an endless whirlpool. Thus, this tragic war was called the Ancient War. The Well of Sun also originated from the Well of Eternity. If it exploded, because of its relatively low energy level, it wouldn't be possible to blow up the entire Eastern Kingdom. It wouldn't be difficult to blow up the entire old territory of Kuel's Salis into the sky. Even though he was standing next to him, Kale was still gambling with Duque with his life. Duque glanced at Kai Zi, smiled, and nodded. Then, he thought to himself, "You're willing to follow me with your life, so of course I won't let you suffer." Duque calmed his mind and began to activate the magic array further. Before he started, he had already felt that the energy in the Well of Sun was like a ball that had been squeezed, extended, and squeezed again. If the magic power of the Well of Sun was flour, it wouldn't be a big deal. But in front of the magnification effect of the system elf, which was like a super high-power microscope, Duque could see that the molecules of magic power had become very loose and unstable. The magic power molecules played out the process from birth to youth, to aging, to death. Each process became shorter and shorter. Duque gently pressed his hands forward. Suddenly, the muddy well water in front of him sprayed into the sky, turning into countless rainbows that flickered with strange colors, some of which Kale, that's had never seen before. The well water kept erupting, soaring into the sky with a momentum even more violent than a volcanic eruption. People who didn't know better would think that it was fireworks blooming in the sky, disappearing, and blooming again. Each blooming became more and more mysterious and blurry. Chapter 835. Hundreds of miles away, the elves on the beach could see the pillar of light rising into the sky. Looking at the strange black and green rainbows that emitted an ominous aura, the timid elves' legs began to shake incessantly, and their backs were drenched in cold sweat. Even though they knew that this was a safe area declared by the National Rescue Committee, some elves still fled in the direction of the Well of the Sun in a panic. Of course, more elves stared in the direction of the pillar of light with complicated expressions. The glory of the Sunwell had favored the High Elves for nearly 7,000 years. There were very few elves of the older generation who had witnessed the birth of the Sunwell. Most of them did not burn out their lifespans, but were lost in the nearly 4,000-year war with the trolls. The rest were basically the elders of various small families. Those who could survive the invasion of the Calamity Army were rare existences. Almost all the new generation of elves grew up under the glory of the Sunwell. Under the protection of the giant magic circle, they enjoyed more than 2,800 years of comfort. It was not until the two battles of the Dark Portal that their fantasy of hiding in a safe protective shell for the rest of their lives was completely shattered. The expressions on their faces were extremely complicated. If it were not for the appearance of Sylvanas, perhaps they would not even know where their future was. The dark green water vapor rolling in the sky seemed to be the grin of the Lich King Zul. More than one elf saw a huge skull laughing silently in a trance. And in the midst of the skeleton's laughter, a second feeling of horror came. Seeing the pillar of light was a visual one. Feeling the tremor was a tactile one. The more direct feeling of the body gave the elves a more terrifying shock. Boom! Boom! The Isle of Quell, Donna's, was shaking violently. The tremor was more violent than an earthquake, and it directly set off a tsunami. It was as if an ancient behemoth was awakening at the bottom of the sea, letting out bursts of roars. Ah! Some elven children screamed. Don't be afraid. Lady Sylvanas, who is about to become the queen, will protect us. The mother comforted her child. However, it was useless. Don't be afraid. The Duque who used the war flag to repel the evil orcs will protect us. Miraculously, despite their sniffles, the children actually stopped crying. Whether they were willing or not, in the hearts of the elves, Duque, who had saved Kuel Salis twice, had already become sacred. The huge waves caused by the tsunami rushed towards the seaside in an overwhelming manner. If it weren't for what happened next, it would have been a terrible disaster. Out of nowhere, a gigantic wall of air that was 1,000 meters tall suddenly appeared on the beach, separating the entire beach from the sea. The shockingly huge waves that were more than 10 meters high hit the surface of the air wall. Golden magic runes appeared and disappeared into thin air after the waves subsided. Along with the crashing of the huge waves, it repeatedly appeared and disappeared, appeared and disappeared. After listening to the explanation from the middle-level elven commander, the civilians finally understood why they were evacuated here. This was the magic array that Darima had left behind back then. It was to protect the people at the last moment in case the mana of the Sunwell went berserk one day and the elves had to evacuate. Although the magic array was driven by the mana of the Sunwell, it operated independently. It only needed to be recharged once a year to ensure that it could be activated at any time for the next year. Under the protection of the magic array, tens of thousands of elves silently watched the destruction of the sun well. That was the end of an era. Hot and turbid well water sprayed into the sky, and a blazing aura swept across the sky. Occasionally, birds would fly by, but they would be immediately devoured by the flames, leaving nothing behind. Splash! 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 The water in the sun well, which was more than a kilometer in diameter, was boiling. At first glance, the water in the entire well was flowing counterclockwise, turning into a huge vortex. However, near the island in the well where Duque was, the water in the well surged clockwise under the urging of the magic array. To the surprise of Kale, Bats and the other elves, the water in the sun well was like two gears of different diameters with the wrong thread, colliding and rubbing against each other at the intersection of the two streams. This is... Kale, Bat's eyes were filled with disbelief. With Duque as the center, the inner circle became brighter and brighter under the high-speed rotation, while the outer circle became more and more turbid and black. At first, everyone thought it was an illusion. Soon, everyone saw a huge contrast between the inner circle and the outer circle, which could be seen clearly with the naked eye. Suddenly, the light of the magic runes on the huge well wall northwest of the sun well flickered. After a few breaths, several pieces of the well wall collapsed. A turbid torrent with a diameter of at least 100 meters emitted a deafening sizzling sound and shot out from the gap like lightning. No, it shouldn't be like this. Very abruptly, the will of the Lich King descended again. The image of the white skull in the void was very blurry, but the sharp voice, the common language with a strong orc accent, undoubtedly confirmed his identity. Duque, you actually broke my secret plan. So what? On the island in the well, a huge shadow of Duque stood up. His shadow's face was full of disdain. No, nothing much. Unexpectedly, Zol's reaction should be a laugh. Huh. I don't like a degraded imitation like the Sunwell. If you want to save it, then save it. But soon you will know what I am going to do. Ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Accompanied by a burst of laughter, the will of the Lich King came quickly and disappeared without a trace. In the eyes of others, Zol was purely there to watch. Only Duque understood the meaning of Zol's words. It seemed that, as in history, Archimonde, one of the three giants of the Burning Legion, was about to arrive. What Archimonde was interested in, of course, was not the sunwell made from a cup of water from the well of eternity. At least Zol was not wrong. Even the current well of eternity was an imitation of the original. How could Archimonde be interested in an imitation of an imitation? Fortunately, if the Lich King did not come to make trouble, Duque's chances of dealing with the sunwell were a little higher. Duque raised his right hand and made a pushing gesture. At the same time, the 100-meter-tall shadow of Duque did the same. For a time, the sewage from the sunwell began to spin wildly on the seaside of the Isle of Quel Danas. Like a whirlpool, everything around it was sucked in. Trees, turf, gravel on the seaside, and even larger pieces of rugged rocks, everything was crushed and then kept stirring in the whirlpool. Gradually, a ball larger than a hill appeared. It was also a terrifying existence that emitted a black aura. Next, more soil flew out from the sea on the island and gathered on the dumpling. Go! Duke stretched out his left index finger, and dozens of glittering magic runes flew out from his finger. They became bigger and bigger, until each rune was as big as a carriage, and they covered the ball in an instant. A few seconds later, after the diameter of the round ball rose to 5 kilometers, it finally stopped growing, and then suddenly began to roll into the sea. Surprise was written all over Cervannes's face. This is, Duque rolled his eyes at her. Is there a need to ask? It's better for you to die than for me. If his estimation was correct, before the magic power was exhausted, the ball would melt in the ocean currents and finally be absorbed by the huge whirlpool in the middle of the endless sea. If one had to say who would be tricked in the end, it would probably be some race living in the deep sea. For example, the Nagas. The deep-sea Nagas led by Vashj. Or the Naga queen of Azhara, who thought of herself as noble, or something like that. Anyway, what Duque was doing now was similar to the nuclear power plant explosion in a certain island country before he transmigrated, which caused all the countries in the Pacific to bleed. But there shouldn't be any races in the alliance of faith at the bottom of the sea, right? Anyway, the elves weren't oceanists. So, cough, cough. The immoral Duque pretended not to think about the development of the situation. Well, so what if all the guys outside the alliance died? What does it have to do with me? That was the logic. Of course, in Queen Silvani's eyes, Duque was doing all he could to protect her and the Long Song forest that she loved. He risked the huge risk of magic backlash to send the contaminants away. Queen Silvani's red lips were like fish in the water, opening and closing. Tears welled up in her eyes, and her entire chest was filled with love. The elves looked at the water level of the sun well, which had dropped significantly but had clearly become pure, with ecstatic expressions on their faces. Unexpectedly, Duque poured cold water on them. Attention! The explosion is coming. A loud roar scared all the elves nearby. They checked their protective magic arrays repeatedly. Because if the magic arrays were broken, not only would they die, but also all the witnesses under the protection of their magic arrays. Why would the purified sun well explode? There was a simple scientific principle involved here. Explosions usually consisted of two parts. One was that there had to be combustibles, and the other was that the narrow space was filled with dust or something. Duque was indeed discharging the contaminants, but the Scourge Army's contamination of the sun well was not as simple as solid particle contamination. If it was solid, like in a certain pure water advertisement, it would be solved with 18 layers of filtration. That was the contamination and impurity on the soul level. With the help of the system elves and magic arrays, Duque could indeed separate the uncontaminated well water from the heavily contaminated well water. But the part in between was not so easy to deal with. The simplest method was still to destroy all the well water in that part. But how? Suddenly, all the elves heard a loud roar coming from the ruins of Silvermoon City. A huge water elemental with a filthy aura all over its body stood up. Its body was dark green, and it was filled with a disgusting dark aura. It was extremely huge. Originally, only its head was sticking out of the city wall. As Duque continued to inject the impure sun well water into the branch of magical power that led to Silvermoon City, this polluted water elemental rapidly grew in size. In the blink of an eye, it became a super monster over 100 meters tall, and its body was still growing. "Duke, what are you doing?" Cervantes let out a cry of alarm. Duke smiled lightly. It's a monster that uses pollutants as its core. It will instinctively absorb the pollutants in the well water as nourishment for growth. When it stops growing, it will be the time when all the pollutants are gone. However, we will need to pay a price to destroy it. First, we can't destroy it in the water. Then, destroying it will also require more magic power. Chapter 837. This theory sounded like a paradox. How could an evil creature that had evolved from its essence be destroyed by another power that had changed its essence? In fact, magic power was the origin, just like the sea was the cradle of life. But after evolution, could the various creatures that it had turned into still be the same? The giant polluted water element used the part of the water that was related to the water in the well. Like a magnet, it sucked away all the impurities in the well water that it could absorb. However, its essence was already a water element that was independent of the sun well, not the well water of the sun well. In the beginning, it absorbed the pollutants in the well water like rivers flowing into the ocean. However, with its poor intelligence, it could not understand that the power it absorbed was only a small portion of the remaining water in the sun well. Furthermore, it did not have the ultimate control of this power. After a few dozen breaths, it discovered, sullenly, that the polluted elements it desired would not come by themselves. Creatures instinctively pursued survival, even if it was a water elemental creature. It began to transform its limbs and absorb the pollutants from deeper and closer to the source. Unexpectedly, in the next moment, there was another wave of extremely large amounts of pollutants. This amount was so huge that it had to retract its limbs, or it would immediately burst from the huge amount of pollutants. It greedily and hungrily digested the new wave of pollutants, not realizing at all that the supply of pollutants had stopped, and that an incomparably large amount of pure energy was quickly being transformed into fire elements. The well water of the sun well was essentially liquefied arcane energy. It was like a huge arcane circuit and the foundation of all kinds of elemental magic power. It could indeed be transformed into various types of elemental magic power. However, the well water of the sun well was biased towards the fire element. If the efficiency of the well water turning into frost elements was 1, then the efficiency of turning into fire elements was 10. Otherwise, why would the Sunstrider's entire family play with fire instead of water and frost? This was also a local adaptation. The next moment, Duque activated a huge magic array that had been set up in the ruins of Silvermoon City yesterday. This was a medium-sized magic array that was based on the remnants of the original magic array. Of course, it was incomparable to the huge magic array that had been set up in the Long Song Forest, but it was enough to deal with this water element. 72 scorching golden magic chains appeared out of thin air, easily capturing the water elementals who were immersed in the pleasure of increasing their power. At this moment, the huge water elemental, which was more than 200 meters tall, was forced to compress its body in the net. It was extremely suffocating in the shrinking space. It had no choice but to bend its body, turning from a burly fatty into a huge water ball. Roar! A beast-like roar resounded throughout the ruins. The polluted water elemental opened its 2 huge dark green eyes and looked around, trying to find the enemy who trapped it. The dirty water elements in his body suddenly boiled like an erupting volcano. His terrifying strength was enough to stand at the peak of the mortal world. Coupled with the abundant magic power that had been strengthened, this shocking aura was enough to make any mortal below the heroic domain faint. Unfortunately, its power, its violence, and even its very existence were only a part of Duque's plan. Explode! Duque shouted. A huge beam of light that was not inferior to the one that he had used to detonate the sun-chasing royal court that day suddenly appeared under the feet of the water elemental, and in an instant, it was completely wrapped in it. Goa! After a strange cry with unknown meaning, it was followed by a dazzling light for a full 10 seconds, followed by an earth-shattering roar that made every elf-sensitive ears ring. In their field of vision, gravity seemed to have disappeared, and countless large and small stones were blasted into the sky by the huge impact. The small ones were only the size of a fist, the bigger ones were like carriages, and the bigger ones were the fragments of the rose-colored mage towers that had once stood in every corner of the entire city. The ruins of these mage towers that had collapsed into several sections were still relatively well preserved because the towers had been hardened and engraved with a large number of magic-resistant runes. But now, they had suffered a second explosion. The previous explosion only detonated one branch vein. This time, it was a big explosion that occurred with the full supply of magic power from the sunwell itself. Rumble. The huge explosion could be clearly heard hundreds of kilometers away. The elves by the sea watched this scene in horror. Even though they had long been informed that the ruins of Silvermoon City would be abandoned as the price to save the sunwell, they had never imagined that Silvermoon City, which they had regarded as a symbol of glory for thousands of years, would be blown into the sky. It would be so shocking and soul-stirring. The layman watched the show, while the expert saw the artistry. At this moment, countless high-level mages had already seen that the explosion was only for show. Along the walls of Silvermoon City, huge beams of light shot into the sky. They formed a three-dimensional magic formation that limited the direction of the explosion and the shock wave. It could only develop upwards and not horizontally. This had become the most prominent feature of the industrial age on Earth, the chimney. The so-called chimney was actually a damn thing that harmed others without benefiting oneself. The pollutants seemed to float away into the sky, but in reality, after floating in the atmosphere, pollutants that were heavy enough would eventually fall. Looking at the notification from the system ELF, according to the current data monitoring and the collection of the ocean airflow, it is determined that 99.8% of the pollutants will float away along the air current of the endless sea. It is estimated that 63% of the pollutants will fall into the endless sea, and 38.2% of the pollutants will float away along the stratosphere of the world of Azeroth, eventually landing on the other side of the sea in Azhara and the land to be named Durotor, as well as several areas further west. The remaining pollutants cannot be calculated. There will be 0.2% of the pollutants remaining in the ruins of Silvermoon City. Yes, Azhara was the territory of those demons, satyrs, and whatnot. No problem. Durotor. If a certain chief still decided to build Durotor there, then, no problem. Still the same sentence. If it's not the territory of the Alliance, it's none of my business. Someone with a dark heart chuckled. The elves could not possibly know what Duque had done. They only knew that what they had dreamed of and wanted to see had once again appeared in front of them. It was the crystal clear water of the well. It was holy water that glowed with golden light. It was the glory of the high elves that had been passed down for nearly 7,000 years. Chapter 838. Although it couldn't be compared to the lake-sized one, the small pool of pure sunwell water at the bottom of the well, even if it was just enough for a few people to bathe in, was undoubtedly telling them that Duque had succeeded. A human had selflessly saved the glory of the high elves. Duque. Servanas couldn't control himself at all. He picked up the slightly weak Duque and kissed him. Her slender and strong arms wrapped around his neck, and her other hand held his chin, kissing him like a chick pecking at grains. Well, if the one taking the initiative was a man, there would be no problem at all. Unfortunately, the one taking the initiative was Queen Sylvanas. Kisses fell like rain, and Duque was dumbfounded. To make matters worse, due to some unspeakable reason, his body was 90% paralyzed. Woo woo. Woo woo woo. Although it wasn't bad, Duque felt a sense of sorrow, as if he had lost his manhood. He almost burst into tears. Kale, that smiled faintly. Hadgeron couldn't stop laughing. Lore, Thema held her forehead, speechless. Gina Goldsword suddenly thought of King Daelin. Rietaline seemed to be in a dilemma, and Lillis's mouth was in an O shape, mumbling something like, brother-in-law, second brother-in-law, and third brother-in-law are all Duque? After a while, Servanas suddenly realized that he had been a little too enthusiastic. Ah! He screamed, and disappeared from the sight of the high elves in a few leaps. The pitiful Duque fell flat on his face, and it took him a while to come back to his senses. Unfortunately, his mind was still spinning, and in the end, it was his maid, Vanessa, who sometimes did naughty things, who rushed over and picked him up. Duque, are you all right? Vanessa asked. Lord Marcus, what's wrong? Lord Thema asked nervously. Yes, Servanas, who had returned from spying somewhere, also sent a nervous whisper of the wind. I forgot to ask you, are you all right? Duque smiled bitterly and said, I'm fine. It's just that controlling such a complicated and difficult magic array consumed too much of my physical and mental power. This sentence was, in fact, an absolute lie. At this time, Duque looked inside himself and saw that his body was like a huge universe. The thick magic circuits were like rivers in the sky, and the magic nodes formed by the intersection of each circuit were like stars, blooming with dazzling brilliance. Between his eyebrows was the earth imagined by the master of the stars, Duque. Using Earth to control the solar system, using the solar system to control the entire Milky Way, and using the Milky Way to control the entire universe. Of course, the idea that Earth was the center of the universe was purely a delusion of the ancients. Who asked Duque to be an earthling? Therefore, Duque, who was an idealist, had unknowingly taken Earth as his boss. He would control 10 with 1 and control 100 with 10. He would continue to expand and eventually control everything in the internal universe. If he had not reached this step, Duque would never have imagined that the mind and soul of a human could be used to create such a complicated and even inconceivable super magic circuit system in such a small area of the human body. As expected, the mysteries of the human body cannot be explored to the end even if you exhaust your entire life. The human body is a huge treasure trove. The soul is the treasure trove of treasures. The most dazzling jewel in the crown. Duque was still in awe. On the other side, Duque could not help but snicker at the system elf's evaluation of him as a level 5 Breaking Dawn Great Wizard. Right. That's right. At this moment, Duque could truly be considered to have stepped through the threshold of a Breaking Dawn wizard and rushed from a level 6 star to a level 5 star in one spurt of energy. It couldn't be helped. If it were an ordinary wizard, they might not be able to wait to advance after obtaining Antonida's pile of magic circuits. Duke couldn't do it. Back then, when he had opened the magic circuits of ice, fire, and arcane magic in one go, he knew that he would need at least 3 times more magic circuits than a mage of a single element in order to advance in rank. In fact, according to the system elf's calculations, to perfectly advance the 3 evolved magic circuits in the Dragon's Slumber Temple, the total amount of mana needed was not 3 times, but 3 to the power of 3. How much was 3 times 3, and then 3 times 3? That was right. That's 27 times the insane amount. The magic circuits that Antonidas had provided had only reached the standard of 3 times, which was far from enough. Thus, even though Duque had the aura of an incomparably powerful Breaking Dawn wizard, he was still a radiant moon deep down. However, everything was different now. Blowing up the sunwell had caused an astronomical amount of mana to evaporate and disperse into the air due to the explosion. As the main controller, Duque had obtained the greatest benefit. 90% of the remaining batch of pure sunwell water had been compressed and stored in Duque's body under the cover of the explosion. It was all used to build his magic circuits. In such a short period of time, Duque's magic circuits had expanded more than 100 times. But because Duque used all the mana to build the magic circuits in his body, it gave others the feeling that Duque had been hollowed out. A bunch of elves shed tears of gratitude for a super thief who had almost scooped up the entire sunwell. Perhaps, this was Duque taking advantage of the situation and still pretending to be innocent? Even best actor Duke had to endure for a long time before he could barely hold back his laughter. Of course, if it weren't for Duque expelling the pollutants, the sunwell would have exploded. Duque panted heavily. The sunwell is now purified. Unfortunately, the loss is too great, so it can't be used for the time being. But as long as it's well kept, it should be able to recover 1/10 of its original energy in 100 years. Thank you, Lord Marcus. Long live Lord Marcus. Praise you, you are the eternal brother of Sin Dorii. The elves cheered loudly. For the blood elves, who had thousands of years of lifespan, it was good enough as long as there was hope. What was a mere 100 years? All of the elves were applauding with all their might, and all of their beautiful faces were glowing and brimming with smiles. The weak Duque waved his hand and left the sunwell with the help of Vanessa and Sylvanus, who had run out again. After leaving the Sunwell Highlands, Duque suddenly saw Bendis pacing back and forth anxiously at the gate of the Sunwell Highlands. Seeing Duque come out, Bendis was delighted at first, but then he froze. There was a worry on his face that couldn't be dispersed. Duque even saw the muscles on Bendis' face twitching slightly. What's wrong? Just say it. Although I can't fight for now, I'm still the commander of the Alliance. Bendis gritted his teeth. Stratholme is under siege. Chapter 839. What? Duke's brows furrowed tightly. As the commander, he knew that the Alliance and the Scourge army were fighting fiercely near the Sotoril River. Due to the sufficient military strength and the fact that Queen Kalia, the legitimate heir, had inherited the throne of Lordaeron in time, the remaining people of Lordaeron in the old territory of Lordaeron had completely united and joined forces with the Alliance army led by Turalion to defend the eastern Plague Lands like an iron bucket. Yesterday, Duque had received reports that the two sides were still in a tug-of-war. How did the defense line collapse and the holy city of Stratholme get surrounded? Doesn't Alfred have a trump card? Duque asked. Could it be Arthas himself? The trump card referred to dumping a large amount of holy water upstream of the Soderel River. Holy water was harmless to living beings, but to the undying, it was even more toxic than poison. Many times when the defense line at the Soderel River was about to collapse, the Scourge army had to rely on the holy water to cut off their offensive. Without reinforcements, no matter how strong the undead were, they would not be able to withstand the assault team personally led by Sidan Dathrahan or Turayan. Abendus shook his head. No, it's an Astrian. The former king personally used large-scale earth magic to change the course of the Soderel River. Duque bared his teeth. Damn it. So many variables. At this point, he could only take it one step at a time. In history, Arthas first settled Lordaeron internally, then went north through Stratholme to destroy Cuel Salis. Then, he went south, ignoring the trembling Iron Stove Castle dwarves and the people of Stormwind City. He killed his way to the blasted land and summoned Archimonde's shadow at the dark portal. Finally, he turned around and flattened the Dalajan. In a sense, he had turned the entire Eastern Kingdom upside down. When he had no more goals, he returned to Lordaeron to rot, until the news of Archimonde's defeat came. The history that Duque was familiar with could basically be thrown into the endless sea, as it could only be used as a reference and not as an accurate one. They had saved Stratholme, only to be attacked by Anastrian's personal army. It felt like they were in a mess. There were two reasons why Abendus had come looking for Duque. Firstly, most people believed that only a Breaking Dawn mage could deal with a Breaking Dawn mage. Secondly, the vanguard of the Scarlet Cross had rushed into Stratholme before the main army. If it was purely military reinforcements, it would definitely be a good thing. The more reinforcements there were, the higher the chances of defending the city. The problem was that there was a Breaking Dawn Great Mage on the other side, which meant that Stratholme would become a land of death. Of course, there was a reason why Abendus was in such a hurry: Stratholme City. The Azeroth human kingdom's economic system was more similar to Earth's medieval Western European feudal society. Basically, it was already amazing for a kingdom to have a decent main city. Most kingdoms only had one main city, which was called a city. The rest were towns or even lower settlements. Lordaeron, once the strongest human kingdom, was an exception. The two main cities were both a symbol of Lordaeron's strength and glory. As long as the holy city of Stratholme didn't fall, the people of Lordaeron could claim to the world that Lordaeron hadn't fallen. The battle around the city walls had entered a critical moment. A slim figure in red armor stood fearlessly on top of the city walls. She raised her hand and said in a slightly neutral voice, "Fire arrows." Behind her was a large number of archers with their bows nocked, their arrowheads wrapped in oilcloth lit with fire. They stood on the side of the city walls, in a temporary archer's position that had been rebuilt from flat roofs. Following her command, countless fire arrows shot into the sky at a 45-degree angle. When the arrows began to fall under the influence of gravity, they fell like a meteor shower onto the empty ground hundreds of meters away. The fire arrows ignited as soon as they came into contact with the flowing kerosene on the plains. The impure black kerosene immediately turned into thick smoke after it was ignited. If the attackers were humans, they would definitely be choked to death, unable to form any kind of formation. However, the enemies were the Undying, who felt no pain. She originally thought that the flames would at least be able to stop the enemies for a while. Seeing that the flames were about to burn the Undying who were attempting to cross the sea of fire to reach Stratholme, she couldn't help but raise her eyebrows slightly. It was a counterattack that she had expected, although she didn't want to see it coming. Thunder rumbled from the forest in the distance. In the span of a few breaths, a large patch of dark clouds gathered above the treetops at high speed. Then, accompanied by a gust of wind that defied the Stratholme monsoon, the sudden snowfall extinguished the fire that had just started. Once the fire was extinguished, the blizzard continued to extend forward until it reached the city walls. The city walls of Stratholme lit up with purplish-blue magic runes. The gorgeous brilliance blocked the cold wind, but it couldn't stop the accumulation of snow and ice. At a speed visible to the naked eye, a huge slope that was more than 300 meters wide appeared in front of the human soldiers. The slope extended from the flat ground all the way to the battlements of the city walls. The 30-meter-tall city walls of Stratholme suddenly became meaningless. Not only that, but countless hailstones formed in the air and rained down on the infantry positions at the top of the city walls. The soldiers of the Scarlet Cross had no choice but to raise their shields and bear the impact of the falling hailstones with their flesh and blood. Crack, crack. The continuous loud noises caused flesh and blood to fly everywhere. As long as the iron-coated wooden shields were destroyed, the thin helmets of the soldiers couldn't withstand the impact of the hailstones at all. In an instant, there was a cacophony of screams. If it had been an ordinary militia defending the city walls, their morale would have collapsed instantly, and they would have turned around and fled. Fortunately, the soldiers defending the city walls were the toughest, most fanatical, and most capable soldiers of the Scarlet Cross in the entire Rotterdam. Even though the neat formation was full of holes from the hailstones, the soldiers who could still move immediately struggled to get up when the hailstones slowed down. They formed a thin line of soldiers and tried to use their flesh and blood to resist the impact of the undying who were rushing up the slope. Damn it! Can't you mages do something? The female colonel in blood-red armor yelled angrily. Her angry yet determined gaze and manly movements formed a sharp contrast with her sexy and charming figure. It was so strong and shocking that it left a deep impression on the soldiers. Unfortunately, her roar didn't get any response. Almost, finally, a red-haired male mage with a scar on his nose stood up shakily. He smiled bitterly and said, "No matter what, I can't let my master, Duke Marcus, down." I won't let you die without opening the seal. What you need to do is just to accumulate your strength. The later you break the seal, the stronger the power you will be able to unleash. The decision is in your hands, your hand. Back then, Duque had sent Luo Ning away knowing that there would be a battle in Karazhan. That deep blessing still echoed in Luo Ning's ears. So many years had passed. Even when his master was not around, the Marcus family's support for Luo Ning had never decreased. They provided Luo Ning with everything he needed, in accordance to the standards of a peak radiant moon wizard. In the East Valley city of the Elven Forest, there was even a tower specially built for Luo Ning. On the surface, it was a radiant moon tower, but in reality, it could be expanded into a breaking dawn tower at any time. All of this made Luo Ning feel that Duque was indebted to him. Luo Ning looked at the radiant moon lich that was less than 100 meters away from the city walls, surrounded by Death Knights. He could feel the female Holy Knight's hope, and with the two remaining radiant moon wizards of Lordaeron injured, Luo Ning said heroically, "Colonel Abendis, I can try." Yes, in front of Ronan was General Abendis's daughter, Bridget Abendis. She had entered the battlefield when she was only 14 years old, and in the past 3 years, she had made countless contributions in the small-scale battles against the orcs. Now, at the age of 17, she had already become a colonel. Bridget's beautiful golden eyebrows raised, and he asked, "How confident are you, 30%? Oh." Without saying anything else, Bridget raised the white kite shield in his left hand and gripped the war hammer in his right. Luo Ning frowned, "You're betting 30% with me? Dalajan. You will never understand the weight of the word Stratholme in the hearts of the people of Lordaeron. Just like how we cannot understand your Dalajan's obsession with magic. This probability is enough for me to bet my life 3 times. Not to mention that you are Uncle Marcus' disciple. 5 times is enough." Bridget laughed out loud. Is that the dusk of desperation? Is that the darkness of the banners? Under the leadership of a female knight who could be considered a young lady, less than 100 Scarlet Cross soldiers and a red-haired mage launched a desperate counterattack against the undying army of the Scourge army that was surging towards them. "Leave the Death Knights to me." Without the slightest hesitation, Bridget used his golden light to block the dark attacks aimed at Luo Ning. Luo Ning charged forward quickly, not even using flash or any speed-boosting spells. In his eyes, there was only the sneering lich who looked like a high elf from afar. As a lich who had voluntarily turned into a human, the former Silver Moon counselor had a face that was more resistant to decay than ordinary undead. The power of darkness acted as his cells and continued to activate his muscles. Apart from his pale face and the ferocious skull staff in his hand, he was no different from a high elf mage. Looking at Luo Ning, who bravely charged forward, he felt an extraordinary jealousy. It was jealousy towards the living. It was also a way to vent his dissatisfaction towards his own situation. If he could turn Quell, the loss, into a nation of the dead after being coerced into becoming an undead and continue to rule over his compatriots, perhaps Shunk would feel much better. Unfortunately, everything had taken a turn for the worse with Duke's appearance. They followed the king and betrayed their people, but only received the title of traitor. The one that Arthas trusted the most was Kel Thuzad, who was resurrected by the Sun Well, and not Anastrian, the king of Luo Ning. This made Luo Ning's position even more awkward. Luo Ning, who could command tens of thousands of elves, could only command tens of thousands of stupid human farmers who had turned into undead. This made Luo Ning very unhappy. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.